was like, well, student achievement took it or policy, whatever it was, it just sort of defaulted. And so I would like at least to encourage us to think a little bit about whether or not committee of the whole is worth us re-looking at. The one thing that committee of the whole allowed us to do was, I think, more sort of engagement with the community, and I think it helped us sort of better define what transparency was, because we were actually dealing with things that related to community engagement and public engagement, at least for a period of time. Now, what happened is it became more business oriented. We started dropping subjects into committee of the whole because we didn't have time to address it at one meeting or something. So to me, it sort of lost focus. So I'm just suggesting that maybe we just take a look at it and see if it's worth even considering bringing it back.
So, I think just to that, and, I think just for my simple mind, the finance is pretty discrete. What kind of goes in that bucket? Policy seems pretty discrete what goes in that bucket. And I think by default, SAC got kind of the avalanche of lots of things that's where people want to talk about a subject. It was kind of like, well, that's where you go. It's not finance. It's not really a policy. And so I think it became kind of like the kind of catch-all of, if it's not policy or finance, surely it's that. At least that's what in my head. Because if somebody came talk to me about LSDMC or whatever, clearly that wouldn't be coming in finance, right? So I think that going back to the first point of saying, in today's world, in the strategic plan, so do we even have the right committees? And then that would dictate what work would go into those committees. But I think it's a function of kind of just how we were structured, where things kind of ended up having to go because it had the least specificity and perhaps, more work on behalf of that committee because, there was a plethora of agenda items that just frankly had to be covered somewhere.
Well,
sorry, Mike, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you. So to President Jones's point,
How do you want to do
to President Jones's point, my hand was up after Carolyn had spoken, and then Ryan went.
I didn't. My question was who's chairing, so
Okay.
I got it.
know
Thank
who
you.
should be calling on me.
Okay. So to President Jones's point about the community engagement, we had 70 people at our last Student Achievement Committee meeting. That's a lot of community engagement. And so my perception is that what was being said was that community engagement does not occur in committee, and that's false. And then to Vice President Messer's point, it sounds like you're intimating that Student Achievement Committee is doing work that's outside their purview, or that we shouldn't be doing as much work? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think to some extent.
No, I'm just saying, like, to answer your question, it's everything technically could be, things would, if a topic came in, it would most likely be student achievement versus finance, for example. Finance, it's like, there's a very clear box. And so by default, if somebody said, hey, where does this fit? My civil mind mostly would be, well, it's not a policy, and it doesn't have to do with funding, it's probably student achievement. And that's without, any other guidance. That's just what makes sense in my head as our structure is today.
Okay, Ms. Bates.
So everything is cyclic. I can give you like a real short history of this committee of the whole. It started out administratively. The administration wanted to give information to the board in a more informal setting. So that's how it started. Then it kind of evolved when we moved into the facilities master plan. The facilities committee was kind of doing what the student achievement committee is doing now, because they were, at the helm of overseeing the $1 billion plus plan. Same kind of conversation. This shouldn't be something, and people would come, every contractor, things would get on the agenda, and I was a committee member, and I wondered how the heck it got on the agenda. And same kind of conversation. We need to bring this to the full board because there is so much going on that it's not appropriate for the committee to handle this area. So actually, every other business meeting, we handled facilities. And that's kind of how we took it in-house. Do you remember? Yeah. Right. So we brought that to the full board. So this is not new. And what seems to be evolving is that whatever, hot topic is on the agenda, student achievement picks up. Just like you said, kind of by default. The board is now saying, we want this to be a full board conversation. So I kind of agree, either we need to do more of the presentations in the committee of the whole that we're doing now at the full board meeting, because really, if we want engagement, having people come in the middle of the workday isn't, the most conducive to it. Move the presentations like we did years ago to the committee of the whole, and have more of the engagement coming during our board hours, and alternating, specific broad topics pertinent to our strategic plan at our business meetings, which are fully broadcast. Anyway, that's a suggestion that has kind of evolved with the board over the years.
Yes, and I did want to respond. I thank you for the clarification, because when I came on board, I think there were questions around how committee of the whole was operating. Mm-hmm. So I've always been somewhat confused about what the purpose of that committee was. I think maybe what I'm talking about is, and I believe that community engagement should be part of every committee's sort of work. So I'm not saying that, Mr. Morosky. I definitely believe that. But if you're having 70 people from the community come in to talk to a student achievement because of whatever they're expressing, that seems like an overload. I think what Ms. Bates is saying, I agree with. We have to figure out what things need to come to full board as opposed to a committee. And so Ms. Bowers had her hand up first, and then you.
Thank you. I just want to give feedback as an attendee to student achievement. Student achievement, there are lots of presenters at student achievement, but as a new member, it's very overwhelming for me to decipher if this is an appropriate group to present to, because I'm on policy. Policy is pretty clear and cut. And so you know who's there, you know what you're going to talk about, but student achievement is not clear and cut. And when I try to get clarification, it's not really clear on why is this a student achievement presentation or a issue, or why is it brought to student achievement. It seems like there should be another group to me, because when the last student achievement meeting I was in, it was 3 hours. That was like a board meeting in the middle of the day, after I had been in, I think, policy. So I went just to attend, but it was a very long meeting, and I thought that was a lot of time out of people's day. But I just kind of felt like some of the things that were in student achievement, there needs to be another pocket for some of the things. And I wouldn't mind having all the presentations at the board, because that'll give me clarity about what we're talking about and where things came from and how they came to us, as opposed to feeling like they came a different route and then they come to the board. So that's just my opinion. I would think it should be another group, and it should be some clear roles or clear lanes for what everything should be in.
Mr. Morosky.
Can I ask Member Bowers a question before I respond to what I wanted to say? What specifically did you not think belonged in student achievement?
I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I don't know what belongs in student achievement, because I really probably need to get clarity on what it does, but I know we went from academics to social things. It kind of felt like it was a lot of overlap of components in that one, even though it...
New projects?
Yeah.
Projects?
Things were coming up,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, it was a lot of different groups. I think it should be clear lines of what student achievement. To me, when I think of student achievement, I think of academics, right? When you think of achievement, I think academics. But there were a lot of social things that went on in student achievement. This doesn't say it shouldn't be in student achievement, but maybe a different group. It seems like it's too much.
Well, I will be the first to say that I do not relish an extra 3.5-hour meeting in my day. But I will also say that literally every agenda item I've ever asked Board Member Bolton to put on the student achievement agenda came directly from somebody, never from me. And they're always introduced if you come to the meetings, so I don't understand where this is sort of, I don't know where they came from. Board Member will say, Mr. Davis brought these people, Mr. Morosky brought these people. Just a couple comments. And to President Jones, not everybody is there to talk. A lot of people, some of whom are here tonight, are there because they want to listen to what's going on because things are going on that are impacting the district. Maybe there's another place where these things belong. Again, fine with me. If I only have to have an extra 1.5-hour meeting a month instead of 3-hour meeting, that's fine. If we take that 1.5 hours and put it at a committee hold, that's okay too. But another thing that I just want to say that I hope doesn't happen, and I don't think it will, because I'm really excited about the strategic plan, and I filled out my document, but I've been in a lot of, different educational institutions, organizations in my life, and strategic plans are just kind of the deal. And if you're not careful, a strategic plan can become a box that you put yourself in, and when I hear it's got to fit in the strategic plan, I get that, but if someone from out there comes and says, we should be looking this way, and it doesn't line with strategic plan, again, to Ms. Bolton's point, we're an extension of the community. We're not an extension of the administration. And I do not want the strategic plan to become a tool to stymie progress or to stymie innovation or to stymie good ideas. And when I hear language like, if it's going to the committee, it has to fit in this box, it's not what I engage in the strategic plan process for.
Mr. Davis.
This conversation about Student Achievement Committee is troubling for me. I'm not certain if board members are reading their minutes, because everything that happens in student achievement is in the minutes before it comes to, maybe I'm reading the minutes because I'm sitting in student achievement and I want to be prepared for Monday night when we get to the meeting. But the activity that is going on in student achievement has not been outside the work plan, even to Mr. Morowski's point in regards to a box. The student achievement work plan, which was presented to the full board, has not been veered from. I'm a little confused as to what we're trying to get out of, if we're trying to shorten the agenda. I mean, because I'm trying to figure out how to keep policy to 2 hours, but I've also been, between Melanie and Eve, asking those questions about how to form the agenda, how do we determine what's on the agenda. I have to echo what Mr. Morowski said. There has been no agenda item that I've asked Ms. Bolton to put on student achievement that has been said, no, not 2 weeks, not wait till next month, none of that. She figures out a way to get it on the agenda, and all of my agenda items have come from community members. I've not made one suggestion to a student achievement committee agenda that has not come from somebody in the community. So I'm just confused as to what we're actually talking about. Are we talking about shortening the agenda? The concept of people not understanding what's going on really makes me feel like people aren't reading their minutes. Like that's the first thing from my brain, because I sometimes don't know what's going on in finance because I didn't read the minutes. So then I go, oh, I gotta go home, read these minutes, and now I'm back on track. But if you're not reading your minutes, then you're not gonna know what's going on. It's just that simple. The only meeting I don't go to is finance. So I gotta double time read those minutes.
Okay.
Or I would not know what's going on just because of the board meeting. The board meeting does not cover everything in finance.
Okay. Ms. Bates.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what is the biggest concern for me. And, I mean, you could look at a work plan, and if it's broadly written, you could put just about anything under it, really. And for finance, not except for policy, because you have to do policies, but for, finance and for student achievement. But probably before the newest board, the board established that the committee work would be driven by the full board, and that the full board would make assignments to the committee, not community members, not, individual board members putting agenda items on, that it would, say, I'll use student voice. We voted on that. And then all of a sudden, it was in student achievement. And the board didn't assign it to student achievement, and now we're finding out that technically it should have been in policy. So that kind of thing, that the work plan is being interpreted broadly, and that I feel that there are agenda items being placed that the board didn't give direction to the committee to do. That's what my perception is.
Mr. Davis, followed by Mr. Messer.
Dear Member Bates, that is such a super clear point you just made. For a new board member who thought that the board agenda was the responsibility of the board chair, that is a very distinct difference. If the board agenda, if the committee agenda is the responsibility of the board, then there's our issue. That was not how I was operating. I was operating that the committee agenda was the responsibility of the committee chair, because I've never brought an issue to the board saying, hey, can I get this on student achievement? And nobody's ever brought an issue to the board saying, can they get it on policy either. I've gotten emails. Mike sent me an email about a policy. I brought it to the policy committee. So I don't know that, I know this one new board member is not working under that assumption. And I don't know about Ms. Bowers or the other two new board members, the 2-year board members. So we got to I think we need to fix that first.
Mr. Messer.
Yeah, so, this is not one that, I've had too much concern about, frankly, where it's not something that's kept me up at night or whatever. But just taking up 30,000 foot view and thinking through kind of that, if we'd gone through that exercise, the trust and then the conflict or whatever, even the body language got so tense just around this one topic. And so, and I think it's a kind of a build perhaps over time, because there would be maybe comments or whatever. And, what I believe this goes back to is just, going back to the onboarding, because even I didn't know that point, because that was not kind of shared, and I think alignment on kind of protocol and standards. I didn't know about Cal. I came after Cal, and there was talk about Cal, but nobody actually said this is what Cal is. And so when they said, "Oh, we don't have Cal anymore," I'm like, sounds like a good thing to me, maybe. But I think what this calls out is a really good opportunity for committees, as we structure, my opinion, in the new world. Structure is just to have good, open discussion on kind of what our process is to operate in that world. Because to the point of onboarding, I want to put an exclamation for anybody that goes beyond any of us in the decades ahead. I think there is a real opportunity to just make sure that we align those people to a common understanding with everybody else that's on the board each year.
Go ahead, Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, I have several comments, not surprisingly. But as the second most ranking person on the board, I don't agree with, obviously, Spates' interpretation that the committees only do what the board assigns. To me, that means that's why the board approves work plans. That's why the board has to approve minutes, or why committees have to. If we did only what the board assigned us, we wouldn't really have very many committees, or wouldn't have anything to do. And besides that, this would require the board's work to actually be fully organized when the full board is functioning. And the full board would have to find another way to have more engagement than it currently does with a 3-minute limit when people come to the public. So there are real cool things that we can work through, but you are changing the nature of the full board meeting. At the same time that at the full board meeting, there's an attempt always to make sure that the message is clear and that it is controlled, versus what you have in committees, where indeed it may not be so controlled, where the message is more diverse and more organic. Couple things. We're not going to change what student achievement or finance or policy is going to do until we have to get a new work plan done and a new committee convened in all of these. I would tell you that structurally, you're going to need, I think it makes sense, to have 4 committees. But that also means that the president has to serve on a committee. It means that everybody's going to have 2 committee assignments. These were the reasons we went out 3 committees, because increasingly it was difficult for people to devote to, because not everybody has 2 assignments. That's just a structural thing. My concern about committee of the whole was that we were really pushing, and especially after the last board election, the number one priority in that election, unlike this election that we're just about to end now, the number one issue was community engagement. We have not heard that on the trail. I mean, we have not heard that. So something positive has happened from an engagement piece. People might not like the way we've engaged or didn't like the decisions that came about, but that's not been an issue. So something right has happened there. The other reason about Cal that was difficult is that Cal is not an opportunity, and the public does not speak at Cal. And we can't do business at Cal. So knowing our volume of work that is needed now in this new world we're living in, we needed to have business meetings instead of the let's all talk with the administration and they present. Plus, we needed to have more of an opportunity for the public to participate, and that's why we also went away from, Wednesday chicken talk, so to speak, on Wednesdays. So there were reasons we did all this. I do think it's reasonable to think about a 4th committee, and I do think that the student achievement has, I think, carried a great burden of responsibility, and I think it's been working. My concern to Mr. Morosky's issue about the strategic plan, I am convinced that unless you have active committees, you're not going to get the strategic plan done. You're not, because we're unable to do the things that we do in committee in the full board experience, unless we totally reshape the board's work and the way those meetings are organized, which I'm all in favor of, because I think we could do much more in those full meetings. But those are some structural issues, but again, that's going to fall to the folks, and we may want to think about looking at fixing the protocol, fixing the assignment of the committees or what have you. But there are a lot of structural things there that need to be fixed as well.
Okay, I agree with Vice President Messer that when we start talking about this issue, everybody, not everybody, but I could sense the tension. And I too am a little anxious about this, because I think there's some sense that people are maybe taking this personally, and it's not intended. I think, I honestly think that we have different understanding and definitions about community engagement. And I'll use the example of, if you have people come into student achievement, and I didn't even want to say student achievement, it could be any committee. And it's something that, it could be policy. But there's something that the community wants to see happen. We need to be clear what the venue for communicating is. Is it the full board? Is it to the committee? Does the charters of the committee identify a process for that happening? And if that's the case, then be that as it may, that's the case. But to me, what I see, and I'm guilty of this, when I saw that work plan and I voted on it, afterwards, I was like, what is this? It just seems like that there's an imbalance in the workload. I'm not saying you all are doing a good thing. I'm just saying it's imbalanced. And there's a lot of work. But I also, and I'm going to say this, taking a risk for myself, and I haven't talked to the superintendent about this at all. We cannot work our staff to death. They have to be able to be free enough to do the work that we're paying them for. And I think what I've seen, because I pick up the assignment sheet, is all of the assignments that are happening, not that assignments shouldn't be happening in committees, but I'm saying there's a lot added to that. And I'm just trying to think of a better way, a more efficient way of looking at that and processing that. I don't want to box us into the strategic plan, but I also, since that was mentioned, I also believe that if we have priorities as a board, they should align with the strategic plan. You know, and so, that's just where I am. So I like the idea of us looking at structure, looking at process, because that's what it really boils down to. But I think what I'm saying is that we really need to give some consideration to doing some things differently. If nothing else, let's define what our role is, both internally and externally. Let's try to think through the best way, how do we handle community requests, so to speak? I mean, how is that process? And I'm just putting it out there as a idea, not, I think he had his hand and then you, okay.
Yeah, so to me, I think that this is the kind of stuff I love. Because, what we're calling out are the things where we aren't aligned. There's a whole lot that we're aligned on. What we're getting to right now are those little things that take you from good to great, where we just have to get everybody in the same hymnal, so we're all seeing the same thing, and then makes the world a better place. So, I'm sure Phyllis has this. There's quite a nice kind of list of things that an ad hoc committee or whoever, I think that shaping that and then having that come as something that we can work towards before we get to January, because I think first assessing the structure, which we all kind of talked about, probably is healthy to do anyway. Well, then that'll start to dictate some other things which may change or fix all of the problems. And I think, to Mike, I think you thought I was saying, oh, they're taking it off. There was nowhere else or lots of stuff would just stop. There wouldn't be, where would you put it, right? And so that says, are there opportunities, if you kind of break that apart? Because, student achievement, academics is a big piece, right? Yeah. So when I heard you say that, I thought, well, and then there's all the things to support. So anyway, I think having an ad hoc to think through this, I think it'll help us, start to get to a place where we have a common understanding. Well, I don't know how that works. Because there was an ad hoc. Got it. Because I remember, there was an ad hoc before we came on the board.
Right. Oh, God, yes. And it went on forever, yeah. But anyway.
But I think just that, the good thing is before January, we really do have a couple of months, now minus the holidays, but there are at least some opportunities for us to kind of work through a process to align, so that January comes, we should have a much more current state alignment and processes, whatever that might be.
That would work for me. I don't know how do we need a motion to develop an ad hoc committee?
I would move that we create an ad hoc committee, and whoever wants to be on it may be on it.
Okay. Okay, wait for discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
and,
Pam, I'll get you.
I think that it would be worth it to have somebody come in who is an expert in org structure.
Brian, no.
That would facilitate with that board to help, because it's one thing to have the discussion. It's another thing to capture it and create the flows for people to see and create the documents that support so you see it all together. Because, so many times, work, community, whatever, you have these great conversations and it's like, let's rock and roll. you know, and we have this, not even at my company, and she comes in, and she's like, okay, no, wait a minute, are you sure you're aligned to this? Now, is this what I'm hearing you saying? Yeah, capture it like that. And you get it, and you're like, oh, okay, now I can communicate that to other people, publish it, et cetera. So I'm just saying that, while I appreciate how intelligent this group is, the expertise of capturing that and creating process behind that might be something that we could depend on an expert.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second to develop an ad hoc committee. Hold on, we had two more discussion. Okay, Mr. Morosky.
Thank you. And I appreciate you all placating me, but I really haven't taken any of this personally. What I've been upset about since that meeting on Monday, and spoke to Ms. Bates, that I had some concerns with the non-passage of our student achievement minutes. So there's no need in not bringing up SAC. It's obvious what you all were talking about when you started this agenda. Was the fact that there were a lot of action items that impacted kids' lives that were not allowed to move on because minutes weren't passed. I still am not convinced that was a legal vote, considering I don't know that you can not pass minutes unless they're incomplete or wrong, but I'll leave that one alone. So while I appreciate, it's not personal, it's not this, I don't take it personally. There were things in there for kids that weren't allowed to move forward because people clearly had an issue. And to Ryan's earliest point about, if we're not trusting and talking to, obviously no one was talking to us before that meeting, so I'll just leave that out there. My question is for the ad hoc committee, if we're going to create another committee, one of the things I've liked so much about this board the past year plus is that we get stuff done. And one of people's biggest complaints about government is that they committee things to death. And we have been moving so well on so many things. And now this work planning session seems like it's being designed to stop, let's reorganize and create a committee. What is this ad hoc committee going to do? That's my only question.
Are you asking me?
Or
you
anybody.
asking anybody?
Well, I'm not the one who's suggesting to make one. So I'm curious,
think
what it's, before I vote on it.
This whole conversation, Mike, has been around structure and process.
I get it.
And people have raised issues about perceived things, whether they're right or wrong.
But everyone's dancing around.
But no, I don't think we're dancing around.
Okay.
I think people have been very honest about their perspectives, about what they want to see. Now, the thing about it is, and this is, and that's why I say we can't take this stuff personally. The goal is for us to be as efficient as a board as possible. We may, yes.
For
sometimes you have to do something different to kind of help bring things to the fold.
This is something that's already been done.
That's the purpose of board work sessions.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So what's the committee going to do?
So, well, when we're going to take the comments that were here, that were made, primarily around looking at structure and process and the work plans, come up with some recommendations about how we might improve our processes.
So the
I think we should acknowledge that part of what we should be doing ongoing board planning and development. This is what we should be doing every year.
Totally.
And that's why we had ad hoc last year, or the year before, whenever that was.
I seriously want to understand what the committee is, so I feel like this is probably an easy yes or no, maybe it's not. This committee's goal will be to restructure and reorganize how all of the other committees work with the full board.
Yes, Ms. Bolton.
First, this is a different district than it was several years ago. This is a different board and different relationship with the administration than it was for a few years, before. The success that we're having, whether that be borne out tomorrow or not, the success that we're having is that we have had a very active, advocating board and, how shall I say it, an exceptional administrative team. And when you have an activist board and you have the claim that there wasn't enough engagement, you are investing every day in that engagement so that we're not doing personal things, that we're doing things that the community wants us to be thinking about. The ad hoc committee that I've ever been on, and there's been 3 or 4 of them in 12 years, I think that's about right, I think about 3 or 4 of them. What it does is it reviews the protocol, it reviews the work plans, it reviews the calendar for the board and for the administration, and it says, these are things that are not working well, these are things that are working well, and this is what we need to do to become more efficient or have a better success rate at what we're doing. So it's a review first, and then you periodically bring back what you've been reviewing to the whole board, see what the board's temperature is, and you also seek out the administration as to, okay, they needed more business meetings. Okay, that was good. We said we couldn't have meetings that didn't involve the public, so that's why you get rid of Cal. We had a PPE committee that started to think it was where the community came, and so nobody came to the board. So there are things that we can adjust, but we start with the protocol, start with the policies, if you will, that pertain to the board's work and the work plan, and we have it now within this context of the strategic plan, not narrowly defining, but trying to find a way to integrate what we do, representing the community, with what the community already has told us with that strategic plan. And I think it will be good to have an ad hoc committee, but I also caution us that we better be careful not to be designing a board plan and whatever based upon there might be a new board. So we have to be thinking about whose responsibility this is. We have the knowledge right now to review stuff, but I'm not sure that we have yet, until whenever, the right to create something else.
Well, I don't know, I agree with that, but anyway, Mr.
Well-
Messer, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Mr.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, and the way I was just viewing in my head the ad hoc committee is what I'm used to calling the annual planning committee, which you have your long-term strategic plan, but you have to make everything local for what are we doing the year ahead? We need to make any adjustments, and then how are we gonna set ourselves up for success in the next year, in the mindset of what got us here, what gets us there. So it's just kind of a calibration. You might say, oh, we should just keep everything the way it is. But if you're not going through doing that, look forward to say, keep, change, or add, or no, delete, keep, or add, whatever. You might be going off in the right direction, or might not be as efficient. And that group kind of synthesizes these notes and comes back and says, based on this, here's a proposal.
And that's pretty much what we did 2 years ago, right? Ms. Bates?
And if there is a significantly different board, they'd be welcome to come to this meeting. I think that would be the perfect opportunity to onboard. And if they don't, then that's kind of on them. So I know that when I was a new board member many, many years ago, I went to every executive session from the day that I was elected. I went to committee meetings. I was heard as a board member was. So I don't really think that's an issue as long as this board is open.
Add to that, on the onboarding thing, when, in '08, when Mr. Flannery and Mr. Nelms and I joined, the onboarding thing was weeks long. And it was not just got the big binder to read through, but indeed the president and whoever sat down and went through it with you. So I think we have a history of doing it right, I think. And to your point, yeah, I'm not saying we can't do anything until we know what tomorrow is, but I do think that tomorrow does impact if the levy does not pass, if there is a brand new board. Those change the context of this discussion instantly. Maybe we want to put in place what we want.
I certainly wish that I had that onboarding when I came
Mhm.
on. I got a binder and,
Here it is.
I met with administration for a brief moment and that was it.
No, it's
I
serious.
learned so much at that first meeting of the year. And I feel, and I'm just gonna be honest, I mean, since then, I really do feel like that when people come onto the board new, you are sucked in to sort of the institutional behavior of whatever board exists, and then you're out there in the loop trying to figure out, how am I gonna get in? How
Oh,
am I
yeah.
gonna get in? And that's how I feel, to be honest. So, okay. Ms.
And
Bates.
this is on topic, but a little off topic, but I think it's appropriate right here. But Council of Great City Schools, as Mike well knows, has that board development at Harvard. And we, at the Board of Directors meeting, I represented our district at the Board of Directors meeting, it received rave reviews. This coming year, 2020, preference is going to be given to a majority of the board with their superintendent to get the biggest impact. And if it's something that we couldn't afford, then some other boards had gone, outside to try to find some philanthropists who would support board development. And that, I believe, and Mike could give me a testimonial to that, might be the most impactful way to get the board to avoid happening to newer members or the appointed members who become, elected members, to have their inclusivity and their voices heard. So,
May I, real quick, just because Billy brought it up, and then, sorry, Ryan, but it was awesome, and I multiple times wish that even one or two of y'all had been there, let alone a majority of the board and the superintendent. There were Dallas's entire school board was there with their superintendent. It was really, really good, and there's something I think also to be said, and I'll stop, to not being here in one of these rooms. Let's, change an environment. There's something said to those, retreat environments. It doesn't need to be all the way out there. It could be Camp Kern, Camp Joy or something, but I think it was powerful. She's right.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Messer?
Yeah, and hopefully they'll double the seats, because there's quite an extensive wait list for that. Because the superintendent, I mean, it was months before, not too long after Mike, and they were full, and they said
but if we tell them right off the bat that the majority of our board and Ms. Mitchell want to go, we would get preference. We
Yeah.
wouldn't be the people on a wait list would be the individual
Individuals.
people like
Got
you.
it. Got it.
That's,
So, but the one thing I was gonna add to that is, so I know we have this ad hoc, it might be additive to put this in there, but, I do think we should scope a project to say, what can we learn from Member Bolton's experience of onboarding? And somebody just craft, what would great look like? Because we may not need it, but we might need it in 2 years, we might need it tomorrow, we might need it in whatever. But I think just having that historical knowledge captured and say, how can we bake that into something where it's just like, okay, here you go, here's the calendar, here's the objectives and kind of the checklist. However we scope that, I think that potentially could go somewhere on a work plan that we could call that a project somehow.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. Is this a voice vote? Voice, okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
I'm sorry.
No, roll call?
Roll call.
Okay.
one more,
Discussion point.
if we are going to do this, if this is a majority yes vote, I would strongly suggest at the first meeting that a charter be developed, to be brought back to the full board, so that this committee doesn't go off and do something the board really didn't intend.
A charter for ad hoc.
Yes.
Ms. Bolton?
Good, I think that's a good idea, and we've done that before.
Mhm.
We've laid out the parameters. I just want us to stop using the word charter, because I twinge every time it's mentioned.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay. all right. Thank you. All right. Treasurer, please call the roll. I know your name.
Mrs.
Ms.
Bates.
Wagner.
Aye.
Ms. Bolton.
Aye.
Mrs. Bowers.
Aye.
Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Messer.
Aye.
Mr. Morosky.
Aye.
President Jones.
Aye. Motion carries. We will get together an ad hoc. Is there anybody, I would say no, of course, no more than 3, but,
I want to be on it.
I want to be on it.
okay. Well,
Cool. 4, yeah, go for it.
okay.
Is everybody gonna be a mic?
You can't,
Well, you can't have 4.
can't afford.
Actually,
Carolyn
I'll
wanted to be
step
on it
back,
too.
and
Carolyn
then you
will
can
step
be on
back.
it.
That's still four.
Okay.
About,
That's still four.
That's
that's still four, because it's
Still
Steve
four,
and me and
that's right.
Ryan.
I would suggest you go. That's part of onboarding for you.
So you trying to tell Ryan he got to step off?
They have to fight that out themselves. Okay. And pick straws. I don't know how you break the tie. You know,
Rock, paper,
we
scissors.
cannot have 4 people.
Well, I'll make my case. I wasn't on the strategic planning committee group. I wasn't on the last ad hoc committee.
Can the president assign? Is that my job?
We know I'm going to be on the board.
Oh, thanks, Melanie.
Short of the metro
So-
bus coming in my way.
Just in terms, hold on. Hold on.
No, we're not doing it that way.
Cold-blooded.
Hold on. Hold on. Yes, sir. I know. Yes, ma'am.
Why can't we look at ad hoc as being a board committee? And that every board member that would like to attend a particular meeting, they're all gonna be noticed. I mean, what is keeping it from being 4?
It's a committee? Is that in?
It's a
the
full
committee?
board meeting.
It's a full
Well, it
board
could
meeting
be.
for ad hoc purposes.
Yeah,
Okay.
just make it a full board meeting for ad hoc purposes and whatever board members wanna come, and a four is a quorum.
Are people okay with that?
Legal counsel just weighed in.
It's legal counsel.
So your bylaws provide that,
But we're getting ready to change those apparently.
We can fix that.
that committee is comprised of 3 members. The other problem, the order of your meeting is not indicated
Yes.
action by a committee. You necessarily require action by a committee, which is why I think.
We take no action.
I understand that. I'm just saying that it's a meeting of more than you're only going to approve of education. So there's certainly had committee meetings when others have attended, but we have always had the position that there should be a maximum. I think the bylaws also provide that the president is
Ex officio.
ex officio member or not.
But I don't get a vote on that committee.
Well, committees
Okay.
don't vote.
Well, they make recommendations, you're right. Okay, so if we have 5 people who expressed interest, I can back out and serve as ex officio, so we have 4. So my suggestion, and this is just, I'm just throwing it out there. I think Pam, being the newest board member, really still trying to feel her way through,
Melanie being
really
the,
should be on
elder
there.
member.
And me being a
And-
middle member.
I see the writing on the wall. The person with the most experience in ad hoc is not gonna be on it.
Eve got kicked out.
Okay.
You can come, you just can't be on the
That's
committee.
right.
Okay. All right. Are you, is that
Oh.
okay with you?
The will of the board.
Okay. All right, so it'll be Melanie, Ryan, and Pam.
This is,
Thank
this
you.
is a persistent theme.
What's a persistent thing?
Just keep going.
See?
Others
What
want
did
to
you just-
Yeah, I'm
participate.
excited about
Right,
that.
yes, thank you. Okay, so, Ryan, Mr. Messer, our next move on this, on item number 1. We took care of, at
So-
least the second and third bullets in
So
terms of the ad hoc
my
thing.
opinion is, we captured one already.
Not to withdraw the board council.
Oh, yeah, we don't need to talk about that anymore.
What's that?
Talk about what?
The board calendar?
Well, but
Board operations, and I'm with Ryan. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
But won't that calendar then have to follow the work of,
Yes,
you know,
It
yes.
folds into that.
I think it's all part and parcel of kind of that future
But,
look.
but we've already adopted the calendar that
Yes, we
is
did.
already built into
Yes,
the
we
school
did.
calendar, so we can't
It's done.
change that.
Then what's this review?
I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell
Yeah,
you.
what was it?
I put it on there, not realizing until later that it had already been approved.
Okay, good.
And
Okay,
it was just gonna be a mention that it was there. It wasn't gonna be a discussion. Good God, thank you.
Madam Chair, then, actually, that will be one of the things that the ad hoc committee will do.
That's
That's
fine.
what they've done previously, is
Yes.
design the calendar.
Right.
But we can't change the current one that
Gotcha.
we're in.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I read this
Okay.
as being the 2021,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
ad hoc
Yes.
does that.
Because
Yeah.
it came out in January for then, like we
It's
voted
always
on it,
3
we
years.
on the board for
Yep.
the next year. Yeah.
Right.
Which we have
Okay.
to think about trick or treat.
Okay,
I already put note to self from Mike.
that's another conversation.
That, I don't remember that.
Okay.
Okay, so I
All right.
feel like we, that was
Are we
a
done?
mention that Mike sent as a parent, knowing what happened at trick or treat night. Mike said, you might think about maybe the day after.
My suggestion was if we always have a fall conference, and if Halloween is during the week, why not have fall conference the day after? So that teachers don't have to deal with a bunch of sugar high kids. And if it's always right around there, which it kind of seems to be, I was just trying to
Election day is
Do the old-
fall conference day.
do the old win-win thing. Well, we'll figure
Okay.
it out, but I mean, Halloween versus
Conversation
democracy.
for another day, right? Okay.
We'll just
Can
have to
we-
wait that.
I'm sorry, can
The
we move
devil
on?
versus-
Can we move on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Uh,
so, yes, Ms. Bolton, did you have another question?
Yeah, I want to revisit, and I want to at least say that I think the Student Achievement Committee wants to resubmit our minutes at the next meeting for
Okay.
approval, and that if there are parts of our Student Achievement Committee assignments or action items or whatever that people want to vote against, that's fine.
It was already on my agenda for next time.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yes.
And also, we did want to, and I think we all did talk about that night, is the action item versus assignment piece. So even if that's just changing verbiage, that
Mhm.
probably would be helpful.
That would be helpful, thank
So-
you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
we'll resubmit.
Thank you. Okay, so, are we complete on number one? Okay, so moving into number two, our superintendent is prepared to give an update on the growth piece. Yes.
But before we get to that, so this is where I think, and I know charter gives, I mean, it's a standard word used for a document that aligns people to a common set of guiding principles.
Covenant.
And, yeah, so that everybody is aligned to that, and it makes you think through a project. My opinion is this growth is a ginormous project. And as such, I think this requires a charter for alignment. Because you say growth to one board member, and it might be this. And some people say, well, I'd like to look at boundaries. And some people say, I'd like to look at these 5 concentrated schools that have issues. Somebody says, I would like to look top down and do that. So whatever that body of work is, I personally, I think it would be very helpful for us to align on what the expectations of the board are in that work of growth. To say, this is in scope, this is out of scope, however that might be. So that we treat this, in my opinion it's almost similar to the strategic plan, in that we all had a part of creating kind of that common set of guidance and understanding, and then the district was then tasked with that body of work with standard and regular updates.
Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable, but I think that work has been done. I think the work, just to your final point there, the work on growth has been done, and it is embedded, it is part of the strategic plan. Both the goals and strategies are there and agreed upon, voted upon, community-driven, community envisioned, and then because I was thinking about this today, that then when you get to the strategic measures, the measures are there. So I think it would be more in keeping to make our charter or covenant or agreement if we want to write something else, I think we lift virtually the growth goals and strategies and the measures, because I think that's it. And that's something that the community thought of, and that's something that the administration felt could be measured in these particular ways. So, I mean, if we do something else, I think at the core of it has to be those 2 pages.
Before we recognize Mr. Messer, I think the whole intent, when this agenda item was put on here, people expressed an interest in hearing about where administration was in the planning and implementation of the growth piece. And our superintendent is prepared to do that. And then the transportation piece, and what I heard the board say is, well, we want to know because all of this is tied to growth. Transportation, the boundary lines, and our current space challenges. So that's what I asked the superintendent to prepare for. So if we could allow her to do the presentation, and I believe there is a presentation on transportation as well, and then maybe we can revisit this conversation. What do we need to do as next steps? Okay. And I'm sorry, Mr. Messer had a comment.
Yeah, and, yes, I understand this is a component of growth, but as a superintendent, I had conversations afterwards. To get to the nitty-gritty of this growth plan was another whole body of work, because you're pulling in data from lots of different sources, trying to figure out where population's moving and predict, space planning, and then transportation over that, and blah, blah, neighborhood lines and all. It's just such a big body of work that it maybe isn't, maybe the charter seems laborious to go around that space, but just an alignment of expectations, because it's pretty general, but I think each of us comes to the table with something or a few things that are really important to us when we think of the word growth. And I just think to ensure alignment, if we capture that, then it at least makes sure, maybe we are fully aligned, but I think that it's worth just making sure that the way we all define growth as far as the additional work that needs to be done, that it's a commonly held understanding.
Can I say one thing to Ryan's
Yes.
point? Like, we have to talk about the other things as other things. They're not growth. Growth is clearly defined in our strategic plan. The other things are the other things. They might impact growth, but to Ms. Bolt's point, when I think about growth, I'm thinking about number 5 that I'm reading on my on my phone. Number 5, growth. It's got measures. Like, we have to quit. You can't change like what's growth. That's defined. It's in the strategic plan. If there are other things like transportation, that's transportation. Transportation is not listed under growth in our strategic plan.
But I have to say, when we were soliciting items, the board members said that is part of the growth piece. It's a huge factor in the growth piece. But I would suggest.
It's a huge factor in growth. Growth is a word that's in the dictionary.
I'm just suggesting
but it's not a huge factor in this growth.
Okay, I'm suggesting that we listen to the presentation, and then if we have questions or comments, or we can take our next steps after that. Because I think we're debating, it's sort of a moot point. We don't even know what she's gonna present until she presents it.
Well, I'm not necessarily debating. I'm just sharing with you all that it's dangerous to have anything under growth that's not in this book that Pam's been carrying around. I use mine on my phone. You can see mine everywhere.
We agree?
Everywhere. And every time I open my mouth, I'm talking about the strategic plan, So if somebody says growth, they're gonna open this thing up, and that's growth. That's all I'm saying.
I think we agree with you, Mr. Davis.
I'm
I
just
think we
making sure.
agree, but it was your board member who wanted to add,
The
Ms.
other
Bolton.
stuff is just,
No, I'm just saying, because people are getting so sensitive about this
it's
stuff.
important too.
The thing is, transportation will impact those measures.
No, it
Yes,
does impact.
everything.
Okay, so what are we talking about? Can we?
I'm talking about terminology.
Okay, all right.
We actually are all agreed.
Yes. we
Okay,
agree.
I don't feel that way, but anyway, Superintendent.
Yes, so I just want to make sure, though, that I am following the order in which the board would like things to be discussed. So when we talked about growth, we did include transportation, but we looked at as the whole growth and transportation as being a part. So is the will of the board that we present a transportation presentation first, or to do the growth and then transportation is a part of that?
Roll with what you got.
You do what you want to do.
Roll with what you got. We'll be fine.
I'm gonna be honest, my preference is hold apart because I'm a hold apart person. But let's go ahead and do the presentation on transportation, and then we'll go into the entire growth
Thank
conversation
you.
that we had
That's fine.
last week.
Thank you.
So it's up
Me
to,
too.
yeah, I am too. I don't like little pieces.
It's football. That's what it is.
All right, good evening. This feels weird, like no podium. I feel like I'm going to perform, right? I feel like I'm going to sing or something. Okay. So tonight, our Director of Transportation, Lauren Johnson, is in Columbus at the National Association for Pupil Transportation Conference, which is right up the road in Columbus this year. So I'm here to present the transportation update, and it is mainly going to be an operational update, which will have growth considerations with which Ms. Mitchell will get to. So as you all are very well aware, we experienced some significant challenges in our transportation systems during the school startup this year. One of our main challenges was being able to handle the volume of questions and issues that were being reported to our transportation team from parents and from school principals. So this is showing the volume of the transportation hotline calls. If you remember, the transportation hotline was set up during the first week of school in response to the enormous volume of questions that we were receiving. So even
Excuse me.
Yep.
Sarah, do you
Yep.
have the actual handouts for them? You had mentioned earlier that you had handouts.
I did not, but I can get those to you still tonight as soon as I'm done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I
Okay.
can't see, that's all.
Yeah, apologies. So I can explain this to you because I know the print is very small. Even the week of September 23rd, we were still getting about 775 calls per week into that hotline center. So the need was very quickly realized to have a system in place to be able to handle the volume of parent calls that were coming in. You can see last week we have finally started to drop in that volume of calls. We had 139 calls last week. Another significant issue that we had during the school startup is we were not fully staffed in our router positions. So even the issues that were coming in to the hotline center couldn't be resolved as quickly as we liked because we were short in that area. So what we are seeing from this data is that we do believe that the questions and the issues are beginning to slow down and being resolved more quickly. We have made the decision to keep this hotline in place and just to staff up or down depending on the time of the year and the volume of the calls.
So Sarah, I'm sorry, just so that 139 calls per week, that sounds like a lot. But when you consider that we're talking about, we transport 40,000 kids, 1,500 bus routes every morning. To go from 775 per week down to 139 is actually a pretty remarkable improvement.
Yes, and yes. However, the baseline of 700 should have, that hopefully is going to be much different, just based on our learnings from this year. And just if I was one of those 139, even though I realize, this is one, you're not forgetting to send something home in the backpack, the permission slip. This is, and I think so, as a parent, I look at those and say, well, what was the topic? So you're probably going to get to that, the breakout of what the topic is. To me, it's there's a delineation between severe and
Can we allow her to do the presentation first, and then, like we do in board meetings, maybe let her do the presentation and then ask the questions, please?
Thank you. So we also did not have a way to monitor the calls that were going into our transportation vendors and whether they were meeting their contractual obligations for customer service and responsiveness to parents. So we have set up a new call management system using our own Avaya phone system, which is the same phone system we use in our IT help desk. So we now have some new visibility into how many calls each vendor is getting, how many agents are answering those calls, how long those calls are, and how many calls or what % are being abandoned. Sorry, clicker. Okay. So we also have had some progress on the MyStop mobile app. If you remember, this is the mobile app that allows parents to see real-time bus location information as well as get alerts. So as you see under the November implementation, these 5 schools, parents will receive logins and instructions by this Friday, and then and we are working on the next 5 schools as well for December. We have also made a lot of progress on our GPS reporting features. So this is what it looks like at like 8 in the morning, where all of our real-time information about where our buses are. Before the end of September, we had about 1/3 of our buses that were visible to us in our own on-screen reporting system, which this is. We're now up to 70% that we're getting that reporting on, and our goal is to get up to 90% by November 15th. By getting that real-time GPS information, we can now get these automated reports about on-time buses and late buses. So this is a dashboard report that Ms. Mitchell actually designed so that we can see automated information. This is not relying on self-reporting from the vendors. This is actual GPS information so that we can quickly see trends and address the routes that are chronically late. We have also been able to take that information and translate that into a day-by-day percent late. So this one is showing the morning buses. You can see the median on this particular run chart is 7.8%. This is a run chart which is part of one of our QI tools and is part of the transportation team's QI project, and they are developing their key driver diagram now. Mr. Johnson has also set up vendor self-reporting for on-time performance, and the most important data that we're getting out of this is the reason categories for the late buses. So the GPS information tells us if a bus was late, but it doesn't always tell us why. So you can see in this particular report, the number 1 reason was traffic congestion on the roads. The number 2 reason was a sub-driver's lack of the knowledge of the route. The number 3 reason was late departure from the lot. So the transportation team is digging into this very valuable reason information, having discussions with the vendor, and actually requesting an action plan for them on how they will correct the reasons that were part of their responsibility. And then taking a deeper dive into the vendor operations, this is a preview of the vendor scorecard. So this gives a combination of the GPS data plus some self-reported data from the vendor scorecard. This is phase 1, and it focuses on safety data, driver data, and maintenance data. And again, this is all really important data that informs their QI project so that we can really show improvement in the on-time performance area. And lastly, the transportation team has done some work on vendor management and vendor selection. They've issued the RFIs, requests for information, and have received 6 vendor responses to that, including some new organizations. And so that will help inform their RFPs, which will be released before the end of the calendar year for evaluation for next school year. So that does conclude the transportation update.
Okay. Three hands. Mr. Davis, Mr. Morosky. We'll just go down the line here. Mr. Davis.
Yep. Should I be aiming it in the back, Dion? Okay, sorry. What was I aiming it at? I don't know. Which one, Mr. Davis?
Keep going.
Okay, back. It's just delayed, I think.
All right, start right there, start right there.
Okay.
Start right there. So were these schools chosen by geography? Is that why we chose those schools at that time?
That is a very good question. I will get the information from Mr. Johnson about how those were chosen.
I think maybe one question on the graph right before this too. It's our GPS, right? No, that's our
Oh, the
telephone.
GPS? Okay, let me find that one.
No, the telephone. The telephone was the one.
The phone
So
system?
are those conversations recorded? Because I'm concerned about customer service.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to mention that that is part of the call management system is the vendor calls are recorded.
Okay, so I think the GPS is in front. Is this the GPS?
Yes.
So on our GPS, and compared to those self-reports, is there any way we can like make jive to that? So the bus driver says, oh, it's congestion. Is there any way the GPS will say, oh, you were riding smooth?
Yes, so we can drill into an individual route and dig into some of that. So for example, we can click into a specific route and see, if you look on the, I know this is really hard to read, we can see the planned stop time on the left and the actual stop time on the right. So we can see, did it actually even leave the lot on time? Or which part of the route did it actually get behind schedule? So we can drill into every route every day to get some more information to compare that to the self-reporting data.
Definitely on the right track.
Okay, Mr. Morosky?
That was not necessarily my question, but it addressed my question. Looking at that big bar graph that said traffic was the number one reason, my mind immediately says, well, the routings are off. And so this information certainly helps with that. So that is great. And then just a comment, that last slide are the 3 favorite letters I've been waiting to hear regarding this issue, which is RFP. So I'm very happy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hopefully
Thank you.
you're talking to some of them up in Columbus at the national meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Thank you. This is great. This is amazing to me and encouraging because the self-reported, again, of traffic, like when I hear buses that are going from the west side and then trying to get over here, that could be a logistic routing issue more than traffic. So, excellent.
Thank you. Ms. Bowers?
Oh, I did have one question. Will all the schools have My Stop eventually?
Yes, we're
Okay.
hoping by the end of the year, the school year.
5 at a time. Can you go back, please, Sarah? Another one. Another one. I want to get back to the calls, the numbers.
Okay.
The graph. Yeah. So are you able to track how many of those 139 calls are part of the group from September that are having consistent issues?
They mainly are not. The main category of calls we're getting now are the space available requests
Okay.
or the deviated stop requests.
Okay. All right.
Still some late bus issues,
But not the same people? that
not
are
the
like
same
seven-
people,
okay.
right?
Mr. Nissen?
It was seems like it's the one, 'cause I just had another text from somebody who's like, we're still not ready left, can you put me in contact? So, I mean, there's a little bit of this where it's, you know, the reason codes for the late, I'm much more concerned about the reason codes for the calls. And if we could get, you know, so if they're, you know, we've had 0 of children dropped off at the wrong location. That'd be a good one, to say we're 0. So if it's 139, people are like, oh, I'd like to make a change. To me, it just really separates the calls into like, these are more administrative calls.
Right.
And because if you see just a number up there, and now that we're in election season, I just know how people work. They had 139 people in the wrong spot. Well, no, 139 had some changes.
Yeah.
0 are in the wrong spot.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So the specificity there, because what I think has drastically improved is any of those kind of outstanding issues, but they seem to just gotten so big over the last few weeks and how we report those.
Ms. Bolden?
I'm sorry, I missed the presentation, and I appreciate if we can get a hard copy. I have just a quick question. You may already say that in the answer. I missed it while I took that long-distance call. The routing from the get-go this year had major issues, obviously. What's the plan as to how and who determines the routing for this coming year? Because obviously this has been difficult. I mean, this is what we've heard on the campaign trail and in the radio commercials and the levy discussions. This was very difficult. How are we going to be planning the routing for next year?
So, great question. This year, there was a very aggressive attempt to optimize the routes in order to have cost savings and time efficiencies. So we will work with Mr. Johnson and the routing team to make sure there's a good balance between service and efficiency in the routes.
And indeed, money is an issue, because it still remains an unsustainable line item. So it isn't that we have to worry about all those things.
We do. Yep.
Other questions?
I'll get the hard
Thank you.
copies. Yep.
Yes, thank you so much. Superintendent.
So in terms of the growth conversation, I don't have a presentation for you, but I can talk to you about what we discussed last week. The reason I did not prepare a presentation is because I wanted the administration to be able to hear from the board, but I will be able to share with you the things that we considered, and we'll obviously use what information we gathered tonight to inform the work moving forward. I do have some information for you. So last week, a team of people gathered representing all of leadership team as well as the transportation department, in addition to early childhood, to really talk about the growth goal and the strategic plan. Just making sure that I passed out enough. I did, okay. So what you'll see is a list of things that we discussed and took into consideration. So first of all, we already know that there's some anticipated growth already in CANS, which will be growing to third grade. And because of the enrollment there, we'll need to add an additional second grade classroom. LEAP will grow to sixth grade, which will then complete that school, pre-K 6. Spencer, we have that at this moment scheduled to grow to 11th grade. And then Gamble Elementary Montessori, the new school, will grow by 2 9 to 12 classrooms. And then we are anticipating adding an additional 5 classrooms at the preschool level. And then there's already the conversation about Lighthouse. Now I put here the renovation for Lighthouse, just so that you can see what that dollar amount is. And where did Sarah go? Because I had...
She went to get her copies.
I was trying to remember off the top of my head the square footage of that building, but it is approximately the size of CANS. And so I just wanted you all to see the estimated cost of renovation to bring that up to code of our other buildings within CPS. And that was conducted by Robin Brandon from Facilities. I will say, and I should have mentioned this up front, so my apologies. If you go to the strategic plan in the growth area in terms of the measures, it specifically says that we will grow by 398 kids for this year, and we grew by 553, and we were 80 kids over our projection. The plan calls for us to grow approximately 400 kids each year, which is basically a school. The plan also calls for us to add 3 buildings over the course of the plan, and this year we added the Gamble Montessori Elementary. So in a couple of weeks, you will see the scorecard for the first quarter of the strategic plan. So Sarah can tell you, because we met with every member of central office. We did 377 people in a day and a half, department by department, talking about the implementation of the strategic plan. Ernst & Young says that 67% of strategic plans never make it to execution. We are determined that this plan will make it beyond execution. So in a couple of weeks, you will see the first quarter scorecard where we have landed on the specific measures that are outlined for this school year. There are only 2 measures that are green right at this moment, and that's okay because it's only the first quarter. And if we were green on everything, then that means our plan targets were way too low if we could accomplish everything in the first 3 months of school. But what we are green on is we are green in terms of meeting our growth measure in terms of we exceeded the 398 and we have 1 school. We did not count cans because cans was already in the making. So as we looked at, so we considered where we have to grow and what we have to do in order to grow these numbers over the next 2 years. So we looked at our anticipated growth, those things for sure, grade levels that we know are going to grow in specific schools that we recently opened. We also then looked at our assets. We looked at Jacobs, and I've provided some documents for you. We came up with 3 different scenarios for Jacobs, which include, 2 of them include a renovation, and 1 includes demolishing the building and rebuilding new. Quite honestly, in some instances, it's cheaper to do it that way. So we looked at assets that we have that we're not currently using to its full capacity. Jacobs is 1. Heinold is another. So we have 47 acres in the area on the same street that LEAP is on, but to the right on Westwood Northern Boulevard, where we had some buildings that were a school at one point in time. We tore those buildings down after the facilities master plan, after we used them for swing space, but we have 47 acres there. Now, a big portion of those 47 acres, it's a rolling down a hill, but just so that you know, we do have that. Vine is also under capacity, so that's another asset that we do have that we could explore how to fulfill the use of that building. And then we also have the Hughes Annex that is not being utilized. So we identified locations and property that we currently have that we could use good use of. As we did our work, we also thought about where are the challenges in terms of capacity. So we looked at Hyde Park, we looked at Pleasant Ridge, Hartwell, Ami, Dater Elementary, Dater High School, and Walnut Hills. You will see in the packet that I provided the cost of the proposed renovation or addition, I should say, addition to Hyde Park School. And so you will see that that is a along with drawings, it is a $7.1 million investment. You will see that the documents I gave you for Jacobs, there are 3 scenarios. 1 is 25 million, 1 is 33 million, 1 is 34 million. And then you will also see an addition for Walnut Hills High School, which is, I can't find it right this moment. I know I have it. Thank you. $6.7 million investment. So here's what we did. We looked at all of that, all of those specific details, and we looked at where kids live compared to where they go to school, a report that outlined that area, so that we could look at, quite honestly, how we are transporting kids across the district, even in some instances from one neighborhood school to another neighborhood school. We looked at transporting our kids across the district from the west to the east and vice versa. We took into consideration all of those things as we, quite honestly, looked at how we could craft some of our work moving forward. I will give you just a little bit of a preview of some things that we did discuss, but again, we were very focused on not getting ahead of the board, but at the same time, we didn't want to come to you with nothing in our back pocket. So we do have some thoughts and some ideas about some things. So, would you like me to continue or questions? Yes.
Yeah, the question was, can we ask questions about the first part of this before you move on? So, Mr. Messer
Absolutely.
and Ms. Bauer.
Yeah, and I may be on a complete island here, but this is exactly kind of where my conversation was about us aligning on kind of our approach. And, and if I'm the outlier, great, I'll just go with it. One way I think we can look at it is just kind of the incremental. I see the strategic plan, we called it, it's a 3-year plan. And I get it, that was kind of industry norm when I was in my initial thought of strategic plan was it was further out than that. And we honed it into the 3 years. And it's the growth piece that yes, the programming and things, maybe you can't plan 10 years, but I think you have to have that 10-year plan for growth. In that, you've got to look at not just real estate, evolution of population, and what else are we trying to solve? Because as I look at this, you know, I could have told you where we have space. It's where we have really good schools in mostly really good neighborhoods. And so part of the growth has to be, yes, where population's going, but also thinking through how do we leverage this? So is it an addition to Hyde Park, or do we need a new Oakley school? Or is it an addition at this school, or is it another option over here? And so I think that, because starting out, of course, it's like, hey, 300 seats here and 300 seats here, but what are we ultimately working towards out here? How does that then go under our equity plan? And then how do we build a very deliberate approach that is much more forward-thinking than kind of the initial target? Does that make sense? So that's why I think it's a much bigger body of work. I guess, just kind of completing that thought, it's a much bigger body because there's the near-term adjustments that we have to just keep things moving. Because people are across the street, we've got people in bathrooms and all that. But then to me, and that's gotta just, we gotta keep that moving. That's like real-time adjustments. But then, thinking about 10 years out, I think there's some other things that we might be doing to make sure there's more schools that have the capacity, and solving kind of those bigger questions of, is it a zone approach to choice, that I don't know that we've talked about that.
Yeah. And Superintendent, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, so what I provided you in writing was just those things that we anticipated would grow for sure, where our assets are, and challenges that we currently know about. What I didn't mention is that we are, actually I think we're pretty close, Sarah's not in the room, to identifying a person to fill the asset or property acquisition position that has a lens and eye on where's the next best place to open a new school in the Cincinnati area. So we did look beyond there as well. Again, I was not trying to get in front of the board. I was trying to provide very specifically some things that I know that the board has been interested in conversation. So I appreciate what you're saying. In addition to this, though, we looked at a lot of other things that I didn't put on this piece of paper. Again, not trying to get in front of the board. We looked at west side, east side. We looked at different programming. We looked at a lot of data and a lot of information. To be honest with you, if I can, I'll just be very transparent on the Hyde Park. When we looked at where kids live compared to where they attend school, quite honestly, if you removed 147 kids out of the Hyde Park school who don't live in the attendance area, then they would fit in the building.
Where
But
are
might
they
you?
coming from?
So we have 147 kids who don't live in the Hyde Park or Oakley area. Some of it is deliberate in terms of, quite honestly, trying to create diversity in the school. So everything has a cost and everything has a trade-off. So we can take those 147 kids out of the school. You may not have as a diverse of a school, but then you'd have the classroom space that you need inside the building to hold everyone. You won't have the gymnasium and the cafeteria. So we looked at all of that. I mean, we dug through and we looked at different scenarios for different schools, but quite honestly, with almost every scenario, there was a trade-off and there was a cost to the way things were the way they were.
Right, and the trade-off also, I've heard Board Member Davis talk a lot about how we're in the interest of diversity and equity, we're transporting kids all over. That's the transportation cost piece. But if we don't do it, then we're taking away the equity piece of it. So, yeah, it's a whole lot to look at. Hold on a second, I'm sorry. Did you? Okay, Mr. Messer?
Yeah, and I just, this is such a ginormous public conversation, again. Because, you know, probably where I've heard the most over my time on the board is this concern from people who live in the area that drives Pleasant Ridge. Like, we have shown you, we need an option, when's this gonna happen? And my whole thing is, hey, we're gonna get you a growth is coming, hold that, we can promise we're not gonna do anything without you. But I think that there are people who have opinions about this, that's why I think that's where my mind instantly went to charter, where it's public engagement in the subject. Let's make sure that all the way through that we are thinking kind of more holistic. Not to say that we don't have to make the short-term adjustments, because we have urgent issues today. But I think some of those Amberley people that have called me, asked me to go to coffee and all this stuff, and you get there and I thought they just wanted to meet, like, well, I talked to you about our option, or bathrooms, or this, or whatever. So I think giving people an opportunity for us to say, we've heard from the public as it relates to kind of this next iteration. Yes, growth is in the strategic plan and everything, but I don't know that we dove into that yet to really get a good comprehensive pulse.
Ms. Bates?
Yeah, one thing, and I'm certain we will need assistance with this, is, have you, and I assume you haven't, taken into consideration development, economic development, and residential development down the road in the city? Like, there was an article today in the, one of the online media outlets about how parents downtown are rallying around the need for childcare. Well, as soon as those kids get to age 3, they're going to need us for preschool. I mean, Camp Washington is a new hot area. Those kids are going to need a place. So we almost need to be a step ahead. We certainly need to catch up, and that's what you've outlined here. We need to catch up with the immediate demand. Madisonville's another one. So we need to, hopefully this asset management person will also be networking with economic development folks to make sure that we know what's coming down the pike, so we can anticipate it.
And we did consider that for those communities that we do know. So we do know that Madisonville is an up-and-coming neighborhood. We know about all of the development that's going in there in terms of housing and condominiums. And so those were things that we looked at as well. But again, we didn't want to come and do a presentation and a recommendation to the board without speaking.
Hold on. Yeah, I know, but we have 2 other people.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Davis is first, I think.
Mr. Davis?
I just got a couple questions. These challenges are right now challenges, so all these buildings are overcrowded?
Correct.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them?
Yes. So Hyde Park, Pleasant Ridge, Hartwell, we actually do have a pretty good recommendation about how we might be able to resolve that. To be honest with you, me is one, in Dater Elementary. Those are ones that, quite honestly, the district can easily control because those are magnet programs. So it's just about the number of kids that you allow into the program. I'm sorry?
Dater and me.
Me and Dater. And then you have, honestly, Dater High School's on here. They're not down here at the microphones talking, but if you look at the number of kids they have more kids than West High with a much smaller space than West High's footprint. Yep. And then obviously, Walnut Hills High School.
Right.
Is there one that we missed? Roberts, they have a lot of kids, but I'm not sure that they're over their capacity. But we actually
700 or something.
We're 8. We presented a resolution to that last year to the board on the west side.
Okay, Ms. Bolton?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
How about the old Burton property? On Glenwood and Avondale?
Do we still own?
I think that Cincinnati Rec is developing that.
I think we just have like a slither of land.
Yeah, they didn't get it.
Because remember last year we agreed.
The whole thing?
Remember last year we agreed to swap out the sides, like there were 3 lots of land, and but I don't know if we have a building there.
We don't
that
have
we,
a building
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Right.
So we can list Burton. No, we
Okay.
just swapped it. We changed positions.
Okay.
Thank
You have another question, Mr. Davis?
Got it.
No, I can wait for, I got a comment on the.
Okay, Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, I have several things. I think this is great, and no matter how big this is, to your point, it has to start somewhere, sort of like, you can eat an elephant, you gotta start one bite at a time, and this still has a nice sense of a larger context to it, and I appreciate it. And you're right, it's a 10-year thing that we're talking about. And we all know we don't have any money to do any of this, so this gets to be kind of interesting how we're gonna figure this out. But a couple things, programmatically and a portfolio piece, the public safety piece at West High, the thing that we talked about 2 years ago also, the military option as a program piece. The one thing we've never been able to get, unfortunately, the boarding school that we had all talked about and thought about, and there was a moment when we had the funding and then people backed out. So all those sorts of things are in your bigger picture, right?
Yes, so.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
So, West High and Dater have brought forth a recommendation as to how to make that entire campus a career campus. And so, I would be happy to bring that to the board at the point in time that you all would like for us to make some suggestions or recommendations. So, quite honestly, we have some recommendations and some suggestions for Dater High School and West High, for Hartwell and Carthage, for Pleasant Ridge, for Ami. So we have quite a few recommendations.
I know that when the decision was being made about moving Gamble to Mercy, we all we were tantalized, if you will, by the idea of that innovation school or what have you. I know there's been some discussion or talk about, if you would, maybe that's part of what can happen with Dater and West High, even, where it's kind of, that's the umbrella view of those two buildings. There's also what we found out, an interest in that public engagement of still having a highly academic kind of school. I mean, as Dater was once promised to be. So as that moves into the career piece, because if it's Montessori, it's not necessarily counting as the higher academic or college preparatory. I think it is, but I don't think that the community necessarily sees that. So in the merging of that, or whatever that's called, for Dater and West High, I think it makes perfect sense that it's something that is that innovation piece that does have not just the vocational or career piece, but it has, career as well, even
Yes.
white collar and what have you.
So we looked at the data for Dater, and
Sound like President Kennedy, data.
there are approximately 50 kids who actually test into their college preparatory program.
Well, and
So-
it's my understanding over the years, the biggest enrollment were the kids that would leave Walnut and then go to Dater, and that is less so now, as I understand it.
So our team even looked at, quite honestly, disparities in
Mhm.
terms of career tech offerings on the east side of town compared to career tech offerings on the west side of town. And it is staggering if you look and see that the career tech offerings on the west side of town are pretty blue collar type jobs. So
And
we
the
looked
West-
at a lot.
And West Siders will tell you that that kind of thing has been happening, or is a reality versus what the East Side has. If I could, just a couple more real quick.
Yes.
The Walnut Hills edition is not about rebuying or buying back Hoffman, is it? It's about,
No. It's about another building on Walnut Hill's current property.
yeah, I guess, I thought, but, I mean, I just think that Hoffman thing could still remain there.
So we
got you.
did
I
look
don't
at
know.
Hoffman, but the capacity is about 450 kids.
Well-
So the 7th grade class alone at Walnut is more than 500 kids. So we did look at it. So there are a lot of things that we looked at and a lot of data that we looked at.
Okay. Hold on.
No, and then the other piece, that east side piece, I do think, and somebody mentioned Madisonville, the east side piece that deals with Silverton and Woodford and J.P. Parker, both, I mean, some of those are under-enrolled, and that could be part of the, is
We
that
looked
part
at
of the
it.
thinking for Pleasant Ridge? Because I know that came out of policy committee 2 years ago. And the other piece is Mrs. Bates mentioning 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, ultimately the need for a third Montessori high school, which will happen somewhere along the line, it would seem. Have we thought about if we do have new buildings, new schools, the program piece of it, or is it just the capacity piece?
We talked a bit about programming beyond just the capacity of a building. I will just say this. We spent a long time. We have some deliverables that people are to have turned in by tomorrow as follow-up items. The decisions and the conversations that we talked about are huge decisions that will have a major impact on a lot of people. And so, so it may sound as if, well, Laura, you're not bringing me a lot of information tonight. What I didn't want to do is come out here and say a whole bunch of stuff that was really going to either upset some people or excite some people. So I think these are things that deserve a lot more conversation. But we do have, and we did dig deep into a lot of different opportunities that might make life better for a lot of our kids and address the disparities that are mentioned in the strategic plan.
Part of the disparity piece also is that east-west piece.
Oh, it is, yes.
Okay,
We looked
because
at
you
that.
can't have the west side get stuff and the east side not get
Absolutely.
stuff.
We looked at that. We really did.
Okay. So we have a number of people who want to
Okay.
speak, so I just want to make sure we move. Mr. Messer, followed by Ms. Bowers, followed by Mr. Davis.
Yeah,
then Mr.
this topic has definitely perked up the people online, because I'm getting texts that people aren't hearing and sending me other places that aren't considered. I think I philosophically completely disagree with Member Bolton in that you got to start somewhere, because you start eating one elephant at a time, you get up to the knuckles and realize it's a giraffe. And we, little tweaks and things, we're talking big changes. So outside of individual, what about this idea over here? What about this school in this particular building? I'm not comfortable having any of that conversation until we set some high-level goals as it relates to this that includes a very specific public engagement process. And yes, there is a strategic plan, but it does not speak to the 10-year look of what we want to be 10 years from now, specific to how we are aligned, how we're building equity in these in the various schools, where we want to expand, where population's going. I think the assessment of we've looked at where the city's evolving. Let's level set, and let's just make sure that everybody is kind of aligned to that. And so I think that my opinion is we got to break this into two pieces: the short-term urgent fixes, and then this longer-term view, because I think the asset manager helps us look at buildings once we've said, hey, maybe we'd like to go to this zone approach. Now go look for buildings that match that. We'd like to have a mix that looks like this. Now look at that. So again, I think that these are two separate conversations, in my opinion, and the longer, more extensive, long range, like one of the others is don't forget Gulf Manor. There's conversations there. Yes, I do remember that conversation. And so I think there's a whole lot of people out there that would like to weigh in and then to build that into kind of a, not the short term, but the longer term play that, to Member Bolton's point, right now is not funded. And so to put that together is going to be quite extensive, and perhaps there are some ways to go to some non-traditional partners to invest in us to do some things that are out of the box. Potentially partners that maybe haven't seemed like partners before, but if we lay this out, that could attract some new partnerships.
Ms. Bowers?
In the scope, Superintendent Mitchell mentioned that the Data and West High had some requests for change in curriculum or instructional, what have you, for their school. And you identified that there were 54 students that are in special college preparatory?
There were approximately 50 kids who took the SCPP test that qualifies you to get into the special program there.
So how many enrolled do they have at their school overall?
Close to 1,300.
I mean, for that's on that track, because they have 2 tracks at the school.
Yeah, I think it's about 50-something kids.
Just 50-something kids.
Yes.
So, in thinking about Board Member Bolton, when she talked about the disparities on the east and the west, and you identified that there's more of the blue-collar work, and that would be kind of the best fit. I want us to think about equity, and a lot of kids that go to Walnut are on the west side too. And so when we're talking about increasing their campus, makes it more centralized. But if we were thinking about equity, we need to think about maybe feeding, like Gamble, kids from the west side were going to Clark. So now you have a school feeder for Montessori. Why not have that same concept for Data, even if the idea is to change West High into maybe vocational or career tech, but you still need that same offering on the west side of town to increase the 54 to 3,500, and then Spencer for Walnut.
So we did look at a way to do that as well. So I am taking down the things that we didn't think about, but yes, that's great, thank you.
Mr. Davis, was your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to know if we have looked at second shift schools and the potential of using the same buildings twice, like one time in the daytime, one time in second shift.
A couple of years ago, there was some interest in second shift schools, and I'm trying to remember, we were trying to find somewhere who actually does that. I remember Julie Sellers was very much interested. Julie, did we identify a place?
Texas. There's an article at the last.
We'll look at it.
It's rethinking how we do expansion Texas.
Okay, we'll look at it.
And my last point was about the Cincinnati Academy of Physical Education. Have we thought about bringing that back? I get a lot of that in my circles.
So we didn't specifically have a conversation about that level of programming when we met last week. But I'll put it. But I do remember you mentioning it more than once.
Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Jones. So I just kind of want to echo and repeat my support for the Innovation Academy that you had brought up during the Gamble conversations into Mercy, and not letting that drop regarding the West High campus. And to Board Member Bowers' point, the intention of Data was always to kind of have that academic track. So I think it's more an issue of how can we actualize it, because the infrastructure is there. But lastly, to the neighborhood school piece, you brought it up regarding Hyde Park School, and I don't know if those 140-some students are there because they were grandfathered in from the old magnet days or what it is, but I will say that, and I've kind of been a broken record about this, if our neighborhood boundaries are drawn on real neighborhood lines, because this city, we did not create the segregation in this city. Certainly, we've probably added to it, but our city is racially segregated terribly. We're not going to fix it. We're not going to solve it. But if we have real neighborhood lines, PRM is a great example. It has Gulf Manor, and it has Amberley, and it has Pleasant Ridge, and it is organically diverse. It has Kennedy Heights. Cairns is a great example. It has Spring Grove. It has Cuff. It has Clifton. I think a lot of these issues, and again, like you, Ms. Mitchell, I'm kind of debilitatingly so hold-apart thinker. The parts are tough sometimes. But, we have a system of segregated neighborhoods. And if we draw our neighborhood lines on 2 or 3 neighborhoods, because our city is so blatantly segregated, you only need to drive 1 block. My neighborhood is evidence of that. Mr. Messer's neighborhood is evidence of that. Probably all of Cloudless Hills, all evidence of that. So re-looking at the neighborhood lines, I think, is a huge piece, and it will create organic integration. cut down on overcrowding, and it's just a conversation we need to have, and we need to have it publicly, because to Mr. Messer's point, I too hear concerns about, you're talking about changing neighborhood lines, and we are, because we have to. And it's the right thing for kids. Again, I'm going to hold up PRM and cans as a great example of both of those. So I would just like to leave that out there. I think it's going to solve a lot of our problems. I think it also speaks to the 10-year kind of looking out, huge global view of what will this district look like.
Okay, actually, Mr. Messer was first, and then Ms. Bolton, and then Ms. Bates.
Can we get the heat turned up?
Please turn up the heat. Anybody listening to that?
So yes, as much as I'd like to keep it up that 30,000 feet, as we're giving some specific things to think about, then I would have thrown out on the table that I do think that thinking strategically about our offerings and how they ladder to the job outlook of the city is critical. And one conversation that I entered into with the superintendent to brainstorm, because kind of an opportunity seemed like it could be bubbling, but frankly put on hold until we have this conversation on growth, is the idea that hands down the number one fastest growing job segment in this city, period, is healthcare. Every arm of healthcare, whether it's medical records, technicians, physicians, nurses, techs, and everything in between. It is hands down, if you look at the chamber's job outlook, it's healthcare, and then everything else is way at the bottom. So that being said, my dream is we partner with some of the best medical institutions in the country. That's my day job, and I know we are blessed with the best, who are civically minded, and some have a need for diversification and are really looking at ways they can strategically do that. So I think that an opportunity for us to live into that is to have a school for the life sciences, similar to SCPA on the arts, where you get exposure to all these life science careers, and as you go through can navigate and come up with a certificated program or something that's pre-med or pre-other other professions, but that it would be almost centrally located, frankly, in some of our most at opportunity neighborhoods, right in the heart of our city, that can then put children in jobs in places that should have been hiring them in the first place, but we can hand them children who have been through training that they can even help create and deliver and give real world experience. So I do think that that is an idea I'd love to throw out on the table for consideration.
Ms. Bolton, I think you were next, and then Ms. Bates.
Thank you. I think Mr. Messer's right, and I think that what the superintendent's been doing, when she was even deputy superintendent, has been moving the district very much into the career path work. And, we have like 4 schools that are dedicated, or at least part of them are dedicated to the health career piece that I can think of around the city, and that's a good investment for obvious reasons, to your point. I'm interested in seeing some of our magnets not be magnets, and indeed be neighborhood schools, and particularly the ones that are under-enrolled, particularly, and there are those on the east side, that would then speak to some of the neighborhood piece that Mr. Morosky's talking about. And I do think that the CANS experience is part of that piece, where you can draw the lines to have the diversity, but not gerrymander a district, but be conscious about particular accepted neighborhood boundaries. And our segregation problem is not just the way the city is or the way our district is. Our segregation problem right now is in those, one of the several segregation problems, is in those neighborhoods that are diverse economically and racially, and are all of one race or all of one economic background. Where we have neighborhood schools that do not look like the neighborhood. That is as big a problem, frankly, for us as the segregated nature of this city, or how we tried to integrate through magnets or what have you. And we have to overcome that, or we cannot make the neighborhood school situation be part of our solution. And I'm thinking in terms of College Hill, I'm thinking in terms of Northside, Madisonville, yes, downtown, Rothenburg. These are problems. I mean, the first time Mr. Messer and I had a conversation, we talked about how are we going to get everybody that lives in the neighborhood to go to that school? And that's a problem. And I think part of the solution is this idea of redrawing these lines, and that's war. Nobody ever wants to do it. Very few superintendents survive it. But and God knows board members don't. But this, my sense of urgency is that these people have been coming to us for 4, 3, 2, and 1 year already. So the community's been waiting for us to do something. So that's the thing. But I would really like to see us reduce some of the magnets, particularly on the east side, and go to boundary lines where you can have the integrity of a few neighborhoods drawn together for that. And I know Mr. Davis also has some ideas about high schools, but.
Are you done?
Yep.
I'm sorry. Ms. Bates?
Yes, and I have a couple of comments. One's along the lines of Ms. Bolton, but one back to what Mr. Messer was saying, unless I kind of misunderstood you. We really can't have lines drawn to keep African Americans out of high-achieving schools, no matter what we do, whether it's in, like Hyde Park. Hyde Park is, we're drawing from other neighborhoods. We can't not do that. Okay, good. Maybe I misunderstood you. Yeah, okay. But,
Well, hold on, let her finish.
well, I'm just telling you what I heard. I heard, not what you said, but what I heard, yeah. And that's why I wanted to clarify that. But back to Ms. Bolton's point, I mean, we have Evanston, good example, an A-rated school, and the neighborhood of Evanston is being bought up by young people and house flippers, and it's becoming more and more integrated. We have an A-rated school here. I mean, can't we get like Cohere in or do some engagement there to at least try to get people interested in that school, because it's clearly not because it's low achieving, you know, it's for whatever other reasons, you know, that exists culturally. So we have that existing, as Ms. Bolton said, in my neighborhood in Walnut Hills, you know, Frederick Douglass. So certainly engagement, I think, would be a good, really, really good first step in trying to bring the community together to find out what do you want? What are the needs? You know, what would it take to, you know, to bring people together to attend these schools that we're like busting butt to, you know, to make into really, really good, you know, places for children. But I think engagement is really the key, and I think Evanston would be an awesome place to start.
Mr. Messer, followed by Mr. Morosky.
Yeah, I just wanted to put an exclamation point on sorry, people online. This whole idea about, you know, the magnet versus the neighborhood schools, and it's a little sore subject for me in that somebody took me to task on Facebook that they were never going to vote for me again because they refused to vote for a parent who doesn't pick their neighborhood school for their children. Well, that school is it's not even half a mile. It's like a quarter mile from our house. It's a Montessori option, and it's right there. I mean, it's one thing when I ran, they're like, oh, he's not going to put his kids in public schools. Now it's like public school enough.
What is the neighborhood school? South Avondale?
I think it might be South Avondale. Yeah, so it's definitely further. But if you go to Mount Washington, and I think that's a perfect example of where the system's broken, because we have a Montessori option and we have a non-Montessori option. I think that's what we have. I don't really necessarily think we have a magnet and a non-magnet. But if you were in the non-magnet, friends of mine who have children in that school who were adamant about me going there, I hadn't been there, and I pull up and it's this gorgeous building and love the principal. It was like, as we talk about, the customer experience was just flawless throughout. They didn't even know I was coming. And then the parent said, and guess what? You're calling me on your robocalls to tell me that I can, if I want to, I can roll in the magnet to pull my kid out of here. And so it created this tension, like they're like, you're trying to fight us. We want this. This is a good school. Why are you telling our people? So some of their parents are like, well, I guess that's better. Maybe I'll go over here. Versus rethinking, because I didn't want to go to North Avondale, frankly, before I was on the school board and really getting into thinking about my kids. I frankly didn't even understand what a magnet was. Because when I went to public school, you had one public school. So the idea that I wanted Montessori is why I wanted him to go to North Avondale. Wasn't because it was a magnet school. And frankly, it is very diverse there, thankfully. He's in the minority in his classroom, but overall the school is very diverse. So, I mean, I think these are the types of conversations that I think they weren't specifically called out in the strategic plan, that they're much deeper, richer, longer term conversations that help us really change the future for CPS in big ways. And our city, sorry.
Mr. Morosky?
So to Board Member Bates, my point was the exact opposite of what you're talking about. My point was, since the city is so segregated, if you draw neighborhood lines on real neighborhood lines, you're going to organically diversify a school because our city is so segregated. So you have a neighborhood like North Avondale, right next door to Avondale, downtown, right next door to West End and over the Rhine, even though over the Rhine's changing. That was my point. I'd also just like to add, since I do equity work in my day job and have engaged in a lot of that racial equity training, implicit bias training for the past 2 years, we're not going to engage ourselves out of racism. And we are not going to engage ourselves to a place where all of a sudden parents say, you know what, I really like my fancy condo and OTR, I'm going to send my kid to Rothenberg. It's not going to happen. The only way that's going to happen is if we empower parents to do it on their own. It's not going to come from us. And it's starting to happen in some places, like that guy who trolled you on Facebook. But if he were to get more community members rallied around, like, hey, come check out this school, my neighborhood school. And I don't know what the code is. I want to help crack that code if we can. I just think it's Pollyanna to think we can engage ourselves out of this racist city and the way it's set up. We're going to have to do a lot more work than that, and we're going to have to make a lot of decisions that, to quote Board Member Bolton, some of us won't survive. But it's worth having, or else we're just sitting up here and talking in these platitudes, and we have better things to do than that. So we need to, like, figure that out, but it's not going to happen through engagement.
Okay. Any other comments before we close out? Yes, ma'am.
I would say that the Montessori example is the best example that we have. Particularly if you take SANS away, our greatest diversity is in our Montessori schools, K-12. Yeah, exactly. And so that program works. And the reality is, and this is important, I think, again, it's not race, it's class. And that's why if we list our schools as having 100% free and reduced lunch, other people are not going to go there. They're not. And we can't like, somehow have a church meeting to make people see the light that they need to. You're going to have to do it through programming, which is why you're doing the Vision 2020. But it's also why, as we look at some of these magnets and some of these neighborhood schools, Mount Washington, I think, is actually a great example, because Mount Washington has a super neighborhood school and a super Montessori school. I mean, when you go to Mount Washington to try to sell a levy, these people stand up and they say, Eve, you don't need to say anything about it. We love both of our schools. So the neighborhoods that are big enough or located in particular places, like a College Hill, can have a magnet, like Fundamental, and it can also have a neighborhood school. But make that neighborhood school actually be part of the neighborhood boundaries. So I mean, these are huge issues to address.
Mr. Davis.
Most of this conversation has been about elementary school, and our high schools are in a tragic condition, and we have to do something. And I think there may be something around geographical context that can help our high schools. I know that the way we have it now, you can go anywhere, is not helping our high schools, because West End and Avondale might not get along, and they both go to Woolworth. And as in Bond Hill said, nobody's, from a community perspective, is paying attention to a West End Avondale beef or Price Hill Avondale beef over at Withrow, whereas that's in Hyde Park. Nobody from a community perspective is paying attention to an Avondale West Side beef. These beefs are going on, and they're impacting our schools in the most horrific ways. And if we continue just to allow this process of you choose whatever school you want to go to in high school, and kids are not choosing schools based on the good method that we would like them to.
It's where their friends go.
It's where my friends go, how I can get there, whatever I can do to get there. And we have to find some kind of way to handle the community inside the school and the communities inside the school.
Okay, Ms. Bowers, and then, I don't know that our superintendent got through her report, but we do want her to finish. Ms. Bowers.
I just want us to be cognizant of when we talk about our high schools, not to go back to neighborhood segregation of our high schools. If we can do quadrants like we used to have, maybe that may make sense, but I'm very concerned about us having neighborhood high schools only because that kind of segregates schools again, which would be a concern for me. But to your point, the cost of the transportation and the selection of the school, because it's a good track for me, I don't think kids are choosing like that either. But I would just be cognizant of going back to neighborhood high schools.
Yes. So, the superintendent, I'd like to ask her to finish her report. But I think I haven't weighed in on this, and there's so many things that have been sort of laid out there, which are all good ideas. It's a good mix. I'll say that one of the things that I liked about what you did when you were looking at the options for when we did the Mercy Building is you came up with all these, you had 8 recommendations, and they all looked, everything was different. And I thought the process that we went through as a board was excellent in terms of helping us think through all of this stuff. So I'm just saying, with all of this, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. I think this is a lot of information and a lot of good ideas, but it just leaves for sort of more work to do this. But anyway, let her, if she can finish her presentation, or you have a
Well, I mean, it's a process thing.
short thing?
You know, I think we built a huge scope. If you, this was the point of the upfront. This is huge. And this is not a tweak here and there.
Right.
And I think us getting that into one document and clarifying, you know, starting to, you know, sculpt the fog into something out of what all we just talked about, because I'm with you. High schools, and that's where the school, the life sciences or whatever, that is like starting to try to think differently about how we, that was high school focus, but there's, I mean, I hear that everywhere. What are we doing with our high schools? What are we doing with our high schools? The neighborhood versus magnet, neighborhood boundary line. So all of these things, I think have to be kind of refined into what we're as a collective group going to say is in scope or out of scope. And then once you have that, it's how do you get there? Who needs to be at the table? And I think that that conversation almost needs to happen before we go further into specifics.
Yes, and I think that based on what we're saying today, I can't think for the superintendent, but I can see her brain going like, trying to respond to everything that people saying in some comprehensive way. So I think that'll happen. But anyway, good luck with that. But anyway, if you could finish your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. So we have some deliverables for tomorrow to dig a little bit deeper into some more data. What we could do is at least come back to the board in a reasonable amount of time to say, here are some scenarios or some situations to respond to. Because we have thought through quite a few things, and I do have a lot of really great notes based upon what you've said tonight. I do believe that this is huge work, and it will take some engagement to get us through it. because we're talking about massive changes for
Yes.
people.
So in the context of your presentation and all the information that has been discussed today, so those 3 areas that we asked you to address, the one that we just kind of touched on was the redrawing of the boundary lines. And I know that there was some action taken along the boundary lines. I don't know if there was some action, but one of the questions that I had is, where are we in terms of the redrawing of boundary line, that discussion that happened at whatever time it happened? Because I think that a lot of the messaging that happens, I think a lot of messaging about redrawing boundary lines has really upset the public. And so we need to be clear about how we need to handle that as from where we sit. Go ahead. Ms. Bolton?
We, and the board took action, we had to draw boundary lines for cans. And in order to get cans done, to Mr. Marowski's suggestion and point, we made sure it wasn't just Clifton. That indeed we included Spring Grove Village, and we included Cuff to create the diversity. But we recognized those 3 neighborhoods, the integrity of those 3 neighborhoods, which, 1,000 years ago, when we had Aiken as a neighborhood school, we had 6 neighborhoods. But they were drawn, that 6 neighborhoods all went to one high school. But those were recognized neighborhood boundaries, and it was incredibly diverse. I think that's where we were talking about, and then the cans boundary lines that we put into effect. Then we also, in those years, went to the Winton Hills people who wanted their kids to be in the Winton Hills school, and then Pleasant Hill, it was the College Hill boundaries, and then Mount Airy was College Hill boundaries. So that got to be that Mount Airy was a neighborhood school, Pleasant Hill was a neighborhood school, so was Winton Hills.
My question is, because I know that there's conversations in the community about those particular areas, not cans. I'm very familiar with that. But is there something happening in those other areas now?
Well, it's 2 years old. I don't know.
Have the boundary lines been redrawn and kids are moving into different schools?
The boundary lines were redrawn.
Okay, but
2
no
years ago,
action has been.
But nobody's announced
Okay.
that, but you and I going to College Hill Forum to show them the boundary lines that were adopted.
I didn't present that. I want to be
Okay.
clear about that.
Okay, no, but that is action that's been taken.
Okay.
What
All
has
right.
not been taken is the Pleasant Ridge piece and all the east side stuff.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to be clear where we were with that. It all factors into this.
Absolutely.
So I think our message has to be consistent. And I think rather than upset people in the community about it, we just need to be clear where we're going with this. So that's why I raised it. Okay.
So could I ask a point of clarification? So in terms of the cans boundary lines, that made adjustments to the Pleasant Hill, Winton Hills boundary?
Yes.
It did? It was Spring Grove, Cuff?
It impacted, we can go back and look at the minutes for the whole board, that we agreed to the Winton Hills boundaries being the Winton Hills neighborhood for Winton Hills, not having a third of the kids at Winton Hills go to Pleasant Hill. And that went to the community council at Winton Hills. That's 2 years or 3 years ago now. And then the Pleasant Hill piece was that College Hill was divided, again, like 2/3 or 1/3, 1/3 or a half of the kids in College Hill boundary lines were going to Mount Airy. And some of the Mount Airy kids couldn't get into Mount Airy school because the College Hill kids were there. So that did, and it was all action taken. We'll have to, if we need to search,
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So
that's 3 years ago.
The reason I'm asking is because all of the Winton Hills students cannot fit in the Winton Hills school. So if the kids who are currently at Pleasant Hill but live in Winton Hills, if they were moved back to their community, they all cannot fit in that building.
Hold on. Go
So
ahead.
if Jacobs is a consideration for that school, then I would just point us back to the cost of a renovation or building new of that. So that's
Okay. So, I mean, that has to be part of whatever you put on paper for
Okay.
us to
Yep.
look at, yes.
And there were options presented by Sarah Trummel Oliver before she was CIO that are in SAC minutes. It started in policy at least 2 years ago, but there are options that are in SAC minutes from last year that speak to
The
that
board.
issue.
Okay.
Because
I-
that was one of the options, was that it would be the Jacobs Center.
Yeah, and I think that that's the comprehensive look that we need. So it's not in isolation. These are not in, one is not in
It's a
isolation
domino
of the
thing.
other. And so we really need to look at the big picture.
To
One
be-
more.
Yeah, one more thing. To be clear, though, because you
Okay.
asked directly a couple times, there hasn't been action that came out of committee based on PRM and the boundary lines there. There was conversation about a lot of the boundary lines inspired by the cans piece, and the conversation about what are there magnets, if we have kids, if we're transporting 3 students from 50 miles away to come to a neighborhood school, or I'm sorry, magnet school, but almost everybody else is around that neighborhood, maybe we should consider it be a neighborhood school. Those conversations happened, but action wasn't taken.
Okay.
So the PRM lines are not changing.
That is what's being communicated.
No, I realize
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
It
but
was
thank
talked,
you
it was
for
talked about as
clarifying
an
that.
option, again, in full transparency, and
Yeah.
it's in the minutes.
Okay.
And we talked about it when we presented the minutes too.
Okay.
And to Mr. Davis's point, we should all read our minutes. It was talked about because,
I-
again, it was a hard, no, it's a
know,
hard, we have to have these hard conversations, and the fact is, we may have to have that conversation,
Right.
but no action was taken.
But what I'm saying to you, I agree with you. If it was in the minutes and I agree with you. Okay, but then we have 1 or 2 board members, whoever they're talking to in the community, and then they're getting all upset because they're thinking it's imminent. It's gonna happen like right now. That's what we have to deal with. So, I get that piece.
Could I just add to that, though?
Yeah.
I think this whole conversation is going to cause a stir, because we are doing this in front of the public, instead of doing it in an executive suite somewhere, changing the life of whatever. So it's going to be happening.
Well,
because-
it's already in the public.
Well, of course, as
Okay.
well it should be.
Mhm.
It's the public's business.
Mhm.
But my point on this is that when we've ever talked in policy, and I think it was Mrs. Bates that was, I don't know if you were chair then or whatever, when it came, these issues have been brought to us by the community. The board members are not putting it on. It is in response, whether it's the Hyde Park people or whether it's the Pleasant Ridge people, and they had some plans. It was what they would like to see, and we said, I don't think that's gonna happen. So and this is gonna happen more and more, the more we are working on this giant big piece, as Ryan says, about all that's gonna be involved here.
Okay. So I just think, just to finish this out, it is very comprehensive and very complex. And I think it would just help us to look at the big picture. So that was my only point. Yes. Mr. Davis.
To Mr. Messer's point, and to your point you just made about how complex it is, do we have a timeline or a wish for some type of
Good point. Mhm.
timeline or
Follow-up.
follow-up
Yeah.
on?
Yep, I can, Superintendent, just,
Yes, so our team will continue to do some work. I think it's going to take us more than a week or 2 to come back to you. Usually we can turn things around pretty quickly, but if we're going to bring several considerations on a large scale back to you, it may take us maybe 3 to 4 weeks to be able to really do that work well.
so maybe at a board meeting in December,
The last one in December, please.
the last one. Okay.
I think
That
there's only
answer
one.
your
in
question?
I don't mean to rush it at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be December, it can be January, February. I just want to give at least these 7 schools some idea of what they'll know what's going to look forward in the
Which is
future.
what they're asking.
Right.
Mhm. Yes, ma'am.
Could I also ask that, like, midpoint of that the board have another discussion publicly as to where you are or not, so that it's not, we wait till December to see kind of they're not gonna be recommendations, but suggestions or alternatives or scenarios.
What, I need to be clear what you're asking
Is it,
for.
well, I
An
think
update
the
from her or an
administration
update-
could report back before the end of that, so that we can continue to have a conversation.
Yes, Okay,
Can we just keep it on board matters?
yes,
Yes, absolutely.
that's where we go, thanks. Yes,
And maybe it could be in a format, not referred to as a charter, but that is, you should have put in there. What the objective is, what's in scope, out of scope, what the timeline is, because to your point, again, these are two separate, there's a work stream of near term, and then all of this is longer term. And so I think as long as we all agree to that, then, I don't think we have to rush the longer piece, because that, just don't put it right before the next election, but,
Oh, no.
Kidding.
We want you all to experience this too, right
Right in the
before the
middle, yeah.
election.
Oh,
but to the point.
like we didn't like we didn't last time.
Hold on.
I think there's separate
yeah,
So,
what needs to happen before next year versus.
if we're really going to look at the economic development and the growth, then that will take us a little bit longer, because I think we probably need to look or have an outside consultant work with us on that component. We can bring to you within several weeks some suggestions around some immediate concerns that or challenges.
okay,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yes, Mr. Davis.
The financial, was that on here? The financial outlook or potential financing options for some of these.
For this discussion around growth?
Right.
I would,
The short-term growth.
I would think, just like she laid it out here, that is part of that comprehensive look, that there would be numbers, that would be some finances attached to that.
Right. I think she has that now, but I'm thinking more in line of where we might potentially get the money from.
Sources, what would be sources?
Sources, right.
Okay,
Yes, once the short-term plan is scoped out, is then we can provide with financial options for you.
Thank you.
What we did go ahead to do and start to cost out are all of the anticipated growth ones on the top. So we already knew these things were going to happen, so we put dollar figures beside those things during our meeting in terms of staffing costs. But I did just want to bring back to your attention Lighthouse and that 5.1 investment. And again, the building holds about 450 kids. So we just need to, and right now I believe that the building has about 75 students. So we looked at all of that.
okay. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Messer? We're at the budgeting equity piece, opportunity index.
Oh, yeah, Melanie.
That was me.
She brought that back from one of her conferences, I'm sorry, yeah.
Council of Great City Schools, you
right.
send me to conferences, and I come back with all kinds of ideas. And Tiani was there with me. It would be awesome if she would come up and kind of supplement it. But our wonderful teaching and learning team presented at the conference, and the other district that presented, not in partnership, but at the same time on a similar topic, was Boston. And they had this really ingenious way of looking at equity and attaching dollars to it. Is that okay? And if, whoops, what did I knock? Oh, I broke it. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Go right ahead, because I know that you're pretty well versed in this.
Well, that's correct. We followed up with Boston Public Schools, so what I will send around is the information. So basically, they have a weighted formula, which we are familiar with here at Cincinnati Public Schools. But the difference is that they look at census data, a part of that weight, from neighborhood safety, so looking at crime rates, looking at public housing, so a variety of community issues to determine how schools will be funded, and it's weighted. Now, they haven't done it for like general fund. They are piloting with 2 district grants and determining how that money is being allocated to the schools. So that's what you have in front of you there. We have a follow-up conversation with them tomorrow, but we were able to get this documentation to explain equity funding and also the 2 grants that they decided to allocate funds in a different way. And this is new for them as well. It took them 3 years to come up with the algorithm on the weight.
In partnership with Boston University, who partnered with them and helped develop this whole system.
Yeah.
So the Office of Equity, the Office of
Opportunity
Opportunity
Gaps.
is a part of the Boston Public Schools?
Correct. They have a specific
They have a
office.
specific office for
Mhm.
that. Thank you, Member Bates. This
Well,
is right
yeah.
down my alley.
What was really interesting, I thought, is it's a pretty complex algorithm.
Mhm.
Obviously, it took 3 years to develop it.
Mhm.
But what the people from Boston were saying was that they learned so much about their students and what was going on with them, with their neighborhoods, the barriers, more so than, they thought they knew a lot, but even more so as a result of this study. So this is kind of a big ask to have the administration take a look at this. And the funding would be incremental according to the need. So, when people ask me what equity is, and how do we do it? And I said, well, this is the way it was, and this is what we do. And these people get really, really jacked out of shape, So it's not it sounds like, mom and apple pie, but it's really something that we need to consider carefully to make sure that this is going to work. Even investing in the study, because we're not looking at just coming up with a formula and plugging numbers in, but this is a pretty comprehensive study of all of our schools and their neighborhoods, the students, the environments,
Right. I think the biggest premise is looking at opportunity gaps, and it's not an achievement gap. It is an opportunity gap where looking at resources, looking at expectations of all staff members, and to ensure that kids have access to great education. And so one way they did this is through this algorithm.
Mr. Davis, I believe your hand is up.
This is, I'm just looking at it for the first time, but this is the same type of things we're asking for in policy around the disparities. This is a much better way of saying it. Opportunity gap, I kind of like that better than disparities.
Correct.
I'll be using opportunity gap from now on. I don't even like disparities. I don't even like that term. But is there, this is the algorithm they came up with, I understand. But are there better categories to contemplate opportunity, in your professional opinion? Or are these like the best areas?
Well, when first hearing the presentation, immediately I thought of what are we currently doing? And so we have really customized our approach by asking principals and the ILT to decide what they need. I think it's important, we talked about this today at PLT, craft knowledge and understanding the importance that people who are in the field and getting information from them. So ours is very customized, and what we have done is also in our process asked for schools to determine the measure and the gap, so to identify the opportunity gap within the school. So the question is, do we standardize the practice, or do we continue to allow the engagement with ILT and principals to customize what they feel as a need? I think the sub areas here are fine. What's very different, so what they're using is consensus data. And so we know that everyone is not visible when using the consensus data. So that is my only reservation in looking at this information. Are we missing people who are not completing that documentation? But this was a way to just clearly standardize the practice and the data and keeping it really clean. But I think the categories are fine.
Mr. Davis, you have another question? Are you done? Okay, Ms. Bolton, followed by Ms.
Yeah, I think this is great, and I've always liked the opportunity gap piece, because that's really what it is.
It is.
It's not a level playing field, and what equity deals with is trying to figure out how to make it more level. This works for neighborhoods, for geographic, but I'm not sure how it works for magnet measurement. How does that?
The data follows the kid. So they look at, for high school, they look at middle school data, so it changes annually. So if you, in reading,
But are you're budgeting for the individual kid, or are you budgeting for the individual site?
the kid which goes to the site. So you're looking at the,
So you're looking at the demographics of the student
correct.
body. Okay. And then we tabulate that. Okay. So if it, all right.
Mr. Messer, followed by Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, I just would add that, you know, give credit where it's due. We've gone to 2.0, I think recently, we've made some changes in our budgeting. And I just see this is now going to 3.0, which is, you know, another layer deeper. And, you know, when I initially heard, it was like, wow, there are so many factors that play into that. But probably the most important thing was just that they had an office of, what was it called?
Opportunity gaps.
Like that was really something to make it up, and I bet we have that, but I think just by having that, like, it said to me like, wow, somebody's waking up every day reporting to their boss, just in that area. So it's operationalizing our equity policy, not that we're not doing it, but just the outward presence of having that speaks volumes. And then the work that can be done just to continue the good work that's been, there's been great enhancements to the budgeting. But this, I mean, to me, it just gets into like the science and statistics to a much greater degree, which, you know, I think can be really fascinating to explore.
Ms. Bowers.
Thank you for the report. This is good information, but I see a huge part that's missing. And of course, about social, emotional, and trauma. And where is that accounted for, measured, chosen, assessed, even if it's identified through the ages, what a child or family has experienced, and then how does that factor into this? Because that's, and then having, I guess, something to be bigger than methodology of how to prepare and train teachers or support teachers around how to help the students around mental health. Because these things that you can touch these.
Right.
Emotionally, you can't touch those. But those are huge behavioral or psychological things that happen and affect students and affect them being able to achieve.
Right.
And that's missing out of this report.
I agree, and especially when we talk about SEL work, having the permission to gather the data. Like I said, this is very scientific and using census data and really try to keep it clean. So that goes to the strength of our ILT and principals, knowing what's happening in their building and providing that layer. But in this formula, it does not.
Yes.
You know, even, forget about the budget piece right now. I would just love if we could pull this together just to look to it. Because to the point of what Mel just said, the people in Boston were just like how much more they learned. I'm aggregating this and allowing us to kind of look across our district. I think even that would be fascinating in advance of even a budget. Just give it a look at that. Now, obviously with us, every census count matters, and make sure everybody's getting everybody ready for that to take place. But what a perfect time to now kind of reevaluate with this new data. I think it's pretty interesting. Good timing.
Ms. Bowers.
Going back to SEL, I'm thinking outside the box, to use the kind of assessment, to identify exposure to trauma and then to be assessed. That's a survey. But to create all schools to be trauma-informed schools will cover all of that. So it'll be inclusive without identifying an individual which to me could be part of something that is part of the methodology, that would be a part of the training for the school in general.
Yes.
From your front office person to your food service person to your custodian, everybody needs to be strong and informed, and that, I think that makes, for a better assumption that we're gonna provide these supports and put it into place.
For all schools.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ms. Bolton?
One particular thing, there are probably half of these things that we already have. I mean, half of them.
So,
Help me out here.
well, at first glance, and I've not seen this before tonight.
Right.
I mean, it's exciting. It's kind of a return back to our original student-based budgeting. So some of the factors, categories have changed. The group of principals and I, a year or so ago, had a fascinating conversation about how do we create a formula around equity. And it was,
Right.
so, I mean, they had some great ideas, and so this would be really cool to delve into. The caution is, and this is what they're gonna learn with this, is that when you have, student mobility, and the dollars follow the students, the staff doesn't follow the students. So once you've allocated staff for the year, what happened with us was many of our schools, who gained enrollment all year long, we had to continue to hire more people. But the schools that lost enrollment all year long, you couldn't take the people out of that building.
That's right.
So they ended up in deficit budgeting. And then we had these loan funds from year to year, and it was very
Nightmare.
difficult to deal with. And it's not, I don't think it's unsolvable. In fact, it just tickles me to death to see this happening.
A full circle. You wait
So-
long enough, you'll see it again.
Well, and unfortunately, at the Council of Great City Schools CFO conference, which is next week, budgeting is a huge topic on it. My doctor won't let me go. So, I have staff that are going in my place, and I've tried to prep them, because I really think, even the state of Ohio, the Patterson formula is a return to student-based budgeting, sort of. So, it's a great movement, and
Okay.
I would suggest taking one or two schools in the district with all
And
funds.
looking.
They're only taking, it looks like they're only taking a portion of funds
For
and
all
doing like
schools.
little grants instead of doing the holistic school budget.
Correct.
That's gonna be
Yes.
the challenge, to go district-wide, scope it up.
I'm just concerned about the pooling piece. I'm a broken record on that.
Yes, you are.
I am. Accountability with pooling is very difficult, especially with special ed and all that. I just think that we've got to revisit
That's why we took
the pooling.
IDOB out of the pool.
Well,
Just for
we
that
have to just, because we are unable to do the line item accountability. I mean, you guys might be, but we are not. The pooling makes it very difficult for us to go to the public and say, this is how we spend the money.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms.?
It's interesting, huh?
Thank you.
Good
Okay.
job now.
All right. So, the next topic is the LSDMC refresher. What, I'm not sure, is this the student achievement?
Yes, I think so.
Is this the student
This is-
achievement minutes?
This is no.
Okay.
This is a year and a half ago, we began the refresh of LSDMC.
Okay.
And that refresh occurred with a brand-new LSDMC handbook adopted, and year before last. And last year was the first year with the new handbook with some changes, and we've adopted yet again some changes to the current workbook. And we had then in student achievement a report back from the first district-wide district-wide LSDMC. And the topics that came up the most were the issue of how do we increase family engagement and how do we get the community representation on LSDMCs. And the one continuing concern from everybody, where there's division of thought, is whether or not the students that serve on LSDMCs should have the vote. So we're in the process of revisiting that refresh and making some changes. And what I think Dan told us that we could, instead of readopting the whole book, we could amend that book on whatever particular topics there were, and the one that seemed to be needing a new vote, if I recall, and I think Mrs. Bates brought up how you'd bring that forward, was the issue of the students being able to vote. And so far, in all of the refresh, that and parent engagement and parent groups were the areas where we needed to look. Everything else, I think, has been proving to work better on the membership and terms and the agenda suggestions and what have you. So I think we wanted to have a board discussion about those items, about parent engagement and family engagement, and then also maybe even amend with the one about student voting on LSDMC. So for future board work, we would have somebody in the majority or what have you bring it forward for a vote.
Okay. Ms. Bates?
Yes, and I know that it's been coming up, in student achievement?
It's been coming up in student achievement on occasion, and it's also come up, I don't know, I don't want to say Facebook, but in a number of other community dialogues.
So it's kind of been anecdotal, so I would suggest that when are we due for a survey, satisfaction survey, or the kind of surveying that we do, that we assess this, and that way we'll find out if it's like a few people saying this a lot, or a lot of people saying this, to make a change. That's what I would like to know.
Yes, Mr. Davis, and
Well,
then
I don't know any student, not one, that doesn't want students to have a vote on LSDMC. So if we're gonna survey somebody, let's survey all the students and ask them if they wanna vote on the LSDMC. And then if you all will go with me and vote yes, that they can have a vote, that would be great, because I'm sure, I don't know one student, and I hang out with a bunch of them. They don't wanna vote on the LSDMC.
Okay. Mr. Marosky?
I was just going to second that from Mr. Davis's point. I was part of the policy committee when we redid the LSTMC piece and took out the student vote. I've since kind of come around after we've talked about it over and over again, and would probably vote to amend the policy back to giving the students their vote again. But I would just say to Ms. Bates' point, it's come up in full board meetings quite a few times as well. Not just committee.
Sure.
It's come up in full board meetings, and not just from a couple parents. So, and again, to Mr. Davis's point, I too hang out with a lot of students, and I can confidently say they would all want their vote back. So, and we could survey and poll, or if Mr. Davis wanted to, because it's what you said at the last meeting, he could bring it up for a vote if he wanted to.
No, I can't.
No, you were in the majority.
You have to be on the dissenting side.
I could bring it up for a vote tonight.
Which you all,
Not tonight.
Right.
You could.
Not tonight.
Not tonight.
No.
Like
Well, no, it
next-
would be against our protocol. It didn't come through committee and it didn't lay over.
Right. So it
So-
could come up at the
So the board,
next meeting.
Does it have to come through policy, or can it come through?
we can go through policy.
so
or
policy could
student
then bring it
achievement.
to.
I can't go, well, it's a policy change, so it would go through
Yeah, it
policy.
should, and that's where it started.
Okay.
But
Ms. Bolden?
again,
Go ahead.
I just, again, you're giving me anecdotal evidence. If you talk to any kid, or, I want to see something quantitative.
What did you have, because I wasn't on the board at that time, what did you have quantitative then? Because I like to do the same thing. What did you have quantitative when you made the decision then?
We had surveys of the LSDMs, of all the LSDMCs. We had surveys with some other body, I think parent groups. There was a lot of surveys. I would suggest, if I could, I think we should survey LSDMCs, which is what we did before, and I think we should survey students at the high school level. We do that, however survey that would be, and then we bring that back. The idea is not to reopen the entire LSDMC work, but indeed the one thing that has been at issue throughout, and it was a close vote. It was hard. It was a hard vote. I think that makes sense to survey the student bodies of the high schools and to survey the LSDMCs at every one of the schools.
And my question is, what happened, are we still involved, and I think I'm asking you, Mr. Morosky, what happened with the student voice
That's a good
project
question. That's a great
that was left by former board member Hoffman?
So it sat around for a while. We finished up building the structure out last year in 2018, and then fall of 2019 had like 1, 2, 3, 4 different folks working at the Ed Center in charge of it. But now we have the new student engagement specialist that I'm going to have lunch with soon, who will actually own Student Voice. Part of the major issue was that there was nobody to really own it. So there is a structure.
Okay.
There is a process to select. It's all there. It
Okay.
needs to be executed. And in my opinion, it can and should be executed before the end of the school year, even if it's only half a year.
Okay. I was just curious, because I think that for me, the philosophy around student
It's a
voice.
big part of it.
That's huge, and we need to know what it is, and if we're gonna have it, it needs to be authentic, and it needs to be engaging with them.
Yeah.
So, and those were wonderful forums for, for those youth to participate, so, yes.
That's just a point of clarification so that we can go about delivering this. So we're going to survey the LSDMC members as to whether or not they want high school students to have the ability to vote on the LSDMC. And then we're also going to survey all high school students. Are we saying 9 to 12?
I think it's probably 9 to 12.
9 to 12?
I get clarity on what we're on high school. If you're gonna do LSDMC across the board, that means you're gonna do LSDMC across the board. For students to be on LSDMC, for twofold, for board to be a part of the discussion, but also to learn and understand how that process works, in my opinion.
Okay,
That's
yes.
because it was only high schoolers that had the vote,
At that
rather than
time.
elementary kids.
That's how it was at that time.
Yes, at that time. However, I do think, and I'm not suggesting this is not a next step or an assignment. It's just food for thought. If authentic youth voice doesn't just start at 9th grade. I mean, so if there are forums or venues within the elementary schools for youth to participate and give voice on just even some parameters around what that is, that also lays a foundation to help prepare them as they move up. So, yeah.
So am I surveying K through 12th grade students?
No. 9 through 12.
Preschool.
Through. 9 through 12.
Okay, so you're saying 4 through 12. 7 through 12.
Let's compromise and say 7 to 12.
Okay, thank you.
That doesn't touch your point at all.
It does,
No
well,
seventh
that gets,
graders, no seventh graders in elementary school. Your point was about elementary school.
well, we do have some 7th graders in elementary school, 5 of them actually. So we have 7 and 8 and 5 elementary school. But to be exact, I want to make sure that we're clear. I've sat on several LSDMCs in different schools and haven't seen students on any of them. On any of them, not even for non-voting. So I think it's important to know what the goal is, what we understand what the goal of them being
But it's-
present is about.
For me, it's also an issue of whether or not 7th graders are ready to feed
Govern
into,
the school.
yes, to do this level of work. I think there's prep work, and I think, they have to grow into that. I just have some issues,
But that
and I
goes
work.
back to you saying that you think they just want to, just to understand the process, even if it's.
Right,
not-
but I
but
mean,
still.
I think what I'm saying is that I think 7th grade is too young to start to do this survey. The policy was 9th through 12th graders, am I right? Okay, it doesn't mean that 7th graders or elementary school can't be involved in youth voice, but I think that has to be shaped somehow. I just don't think they're ready at that time. And that's just my opinion, having worked in developing youth voice on my last job with the kids I worked with, so, yeah.
And real quickly, in fairness too, I think the new handbook that was adopted last year and we adopted this year actually emphasized student voice more than the previous one, even when there was some voting in some schools. From a standpoint, we said the student council should be reporting on the LSDMC agendas, that the students should sit. So it was a matter of governing the school. Should the students govern the school is an issue. And so, actually, I think we increased the opportunity for student input for 7-12, for, whatever. So my interest is that we pull at least the 9 through 12, but I can live with 7 through 12, and because of the way we shape our high schools. But I'm happy to do what you want to do.
Don't
Karen.
look at me. Ask Ms. Bates. I don't even care if you survey. Ask Ms. Bates.
Ms. Bates, did you have a question?
No.
Or comment? Okay. Okay. I don't think we made a decision about that, 7 through 12, or 9 through 12. I think.
Let's just do this.
Do
I
we
think
do a
nine-
student survey?
We do, but it's at the end of the school year. So if you all want something relatively soon, we would launch a survey to ask them this one question.
One question,
One
that's
question.
it.
Go for it.
And then-
Go for it.
And should it be 7-12 or is it 9-12?
I'm asking you that. I'm asking you all. My preference is 9 through 12.
Who's going to explain to them what an LSDMC is?
That's part of the
That's
part of the
issue.
problem, the issue. You get them older, they are more likely to understand it. Even if you put a definition on the questionnaire, they're more likely to understand and be able to have enough insight to think it through. Whereas at 7th grade, middle school,
Elementary schools have student governance.
well, but
So they have to learn some concept of governance somewhere.
but what I'm
I'm
saying,
not saying the elementary schools should do it. I'm
Yeah.
saying if you have
Okay.
central building, it can be.
I'm not, but see, but this is the problem that we're talking about youth voice. We don't even know what it is. We don't even know how we're defining it. But we have, right? Don't we have a definition around student voice based on what we did before? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. We do. And that structure will kick off ideally in January. And
right.
it was the
What grade?
result, is a sum total of many, many, many hundreds and hundreds of students that came to the table to define what it would look like, which is the point why I have my hand up. So yes, it's there, and it's been frustrating, but also understandable, right, for why it's taken a while to get here. And I respect that quite a bit. I'm just happy that it's here now. To that end, I'm kind of with Mr. Davis in that, I would be fine with just re-looking at the policy and reversing back to where we were, because that's where I've been, kind of come in my brain, and I was on the majority that voted in favor to change it. But as far as who the superintendent should survey, I don't have a dog in that fight, and I don't want to die on that hill. I'll let you all figure it out. But I will say that the fundamental problem with surveying the students is they're only telling us what we want to know. And when this is all said and done, and this specific issue that is, whether it's through the student voice infrastructure or another infrastructure, whether it's through Cohere, who, would be great to just kind of have on retainer someday, since we use them so much for whatever. Hey, go get Cohere, go get Cohere. But a focus group, how do you want your voice heard? And again, student voice might be that infrastructure. It might be. I don't know, because it's not there yet. But again, surveys, the problem with adult surveys to kids is it tells us what we want to hear. And so I think maybe that's a more interesting conversation perhaps. That's why, as far as what ages, I don't care about what ages. I'm more interested in how do they want to be heard. And I think, to Mr. Davis' point, they're all going to say, if you ask a student, hey, do you want to be able to vote on something or not, they're going to say yes. They don't even care what an LSDMC is, perhaps, which I realize was part of the impetus to look at
Well,
it.
this is all part of the issue, isn't it?
Correct. No, correct. Absolutely. So anyway, that's all. But I do think maybe how do y'all want to be heard? What is your voice? What does it look like when it comes to us?
Well, I think it's the will of the board. What are we going to do with this, Kevin? If it's as simple as just looking at the policy and working with the policy, let's just do that and not worry about the survey.
But then my issue is if we only change this policy to give one student the ability to serve on one LSDMC, again, is that truly student voice, or should we find out what they want?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I guess I need clarity. When we but that's a separate entity than being an LSDMC,
Yes.
understand the governing of the school. So those are two separate entities.
Okay.
Yes and no.
Yes and no?
It's student voice. They're on the LSDMC, there's a
That's
student voice there.
Yeah.
That's definitely student voice, but
Yeah.
But it's not in reference to him saying the survey
There's
questions.
another
to be,
structure.
What
This
do
is
you want to hear?
silly.
What do you want to say? We want to know. That's not, yes, they're giving an opinion, their vote, they may vote, but that's not to the extent in which he's representing student voice.
they can already sit on the LSDMC.
As a non-voting member, yes.
That's
Yes.
not the question. The question is, can they vote? So the issue is, Noni wants to get a survey to see if the students want to be able to vote. And I'm saying that's unnecessary, because if I sat on, if I was a student, I sat on LSDMC, yes, I want to vote. I want my voice to be heard, because if I'm sitting on LSDMC not voting, my voice cannot be heard, because it only takes a vote is your voice.
Okay, Ms. Bolton?
Yeah, as an old civics teacher, I would suggest that it would be more beneficial to have the students vote and tell us what they want, demand it, rather than have about 10 grown-ups continue to properly advocate for the vote. Let the kids vote or be polled and demand their vote. It's their vote. If it's going to be granted, let them do the demanding of it. Let that be the survey, and that's our justification. It's not because we had 10 people persistently, and I can name them, say that this was a bad decision on our part. I would rather the students. Well, but it's our decision whether you voted that way or not. And you have to live with it. But my point is, I think it would be reasonable. It would also be a public education piece for the kids, and let them be surveyed, and let them demand their own vote, and then we decide whether or not we're going to grant it. It only takes a removal of 5 words out of the LSDMC handbook.
Okay, what grade?
7 to 12.
Thank you.
Let's just do 7 to 12,
Yeah,
and
you were
let's
the
move
holdout
on.
there.
Put it as a question on their English exam.
Yes,
Give them credit.
don't believe it. Yes, sir. Mr. Mack.
One survey.
I'm very much in favor of them having a vote that counts, but I just love that we're having this conversation the night before an election, where we want to inspire them that every vote counts, and to be engaged in the process, and to have children at the table, or students at the table, not just, oh, we want to hear what you say, but literally being engaged there. So, I think it's a healthy discussion, but very germane to the very day that we're about to embark on tomorrow. And a great learning as it relates to that bigger picture of
do
being
it.
involved and accountable to the world we live in.
It's solved, 7 to 12. Let's just do it.
Survey the
Survey
students.
The students. Thank you.
Power to you.
Okay, all right. Okay, other topics, anything?
I think we started with the idea that we really would like the LSDMCs to weigh in too. I think most of them will say, and it's very, Assistant Superintendent Murphy can do that in a much more informal way. Because I think they'll say yes or whatever, at least
Okay,
enough of them will.
That's fine. Great,
I don't like doing that.
okay. So we're moving on. Other topics? Anything anybody wants to bring up?
Should we submit the budget piece that some of us did to Davis or
I would-
directly to the treasurer or superintendent? And then
I didn't submit one, thank you. But anyway, let's not do that.
I will submit one if I need to on Wednesday, but if I don't need to, I won't.
Is that a?
Don't do that.
Can we open that up for a conversation real quick? Why are we doing budget priorities? But this is the wish list. Why are we doing
You're
this?
the one that keeps talking about a wish list.
But that's what it is. I'm sorry?
It diminishes what the request is.
What is
Our
it?
responsibility is to do the budget with the administration and give them parameters or priorities or views or values, things that we want, and we usually end up having to do it in late April when it's too dark late to do very much about it. And so this was the idea in the budget timeline that indeed the board has an opportunity to submit some of the parameters, some of their priorities.
Okay. And I feel I'm offended about that because when you look at some of the requests, that's what it looks like. What people want personally, wish list. But anyway, whatever we call it, is if you want to submit it, that's fine. That was the ask, and you can do that. And then we have to hold on, can I finish? And so when we get them all together, we'll put them together and decide what we want to do. We'll put it on the next agenda, and we'll decide what to do with that. Okay. But if you want to submit it, we do need to put a timeline on it so we can get it together because we really are very late on it. So you said Wednesday? Is that when you said if you do one? Can you just let us know if you're going to do one or not? Let Phyllis know. Thank you. Okay. Okay. That's fair enough. All right. Okay. Okay. Okay, so next steps, there were several things that came out of this discussion. One is that the ad hoc committee will convene and develop a charter. And I think what, charter, what description of what your, outline what your tasks are, what your job duties are. Okay, so you need to do that, and then you all let me know when you want to put it on the agenda.
And Ms. Davis will schedule, just so somebody schedules.
Okay, and then the second piece is the growth update. We'll schedule for a full, sort of more comprehensive report in December, late December, but we'll have a midpoint update on the plan at that time. Okay. And then thirdly, the survey of high school students about the LSDMC. Is there anything else that I missed?
Fourthly, that the student achievement committee is going to resubmit the student achievement minutes for acceptance or whatever, or review, and with the idea that there's certain items on what are now not action items, but are assignments, to vote against those individually, not necessarily all the minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, having no other business before us, I declare the meeting adjourned.
Wow. Wow.
That's great.
With an hour to spare.
With an hour to spare? Whew, boy. I do, Ryan Messer. I do think there's something to a real board retreat that's not in this building. Like whether it uses the tool you're talking about or not, like that. And it doesn't have to be hard.